Yo, what's up everyone? It's Horcrux Harry, and today we're checking out. Daphne Greengrass touched Harry's hand at sorting and Slytherin blood contract claimed him as hers. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1. The touch. The Hogwarts Express smelled like pasties and old upholstery and somebody's leaking cauldron 3 compartments down, and Harry Potter had been sitting alone for 40 minutes trying to figure out if that was normal. He'd watched the platform at King's Cross swallow the Dursleys without a backward glance, Uncle Vernon's neck still splotchy red from the embarrassment of the trolley, and he'd found a compartment, and sat down, and waited for something to feel different. He was going to a magic school. He was a wizard. He had a ticket and an owl and a wand that had chosen him in a shop that smelled like cedar and lightning. It still felt like waiting for something to begin. The red-haired boy, Ron, had helped with that a little. And the bushy-haired girl who'd come looking for a toad. And the food trolley which with her cauldron cakes and every flavor beans. By the time the train curved through the Scottish hills and the sky went the deep bruised purple of almost night, Harry felt something loosening in his chest. Not happiness exactly. More like the sensation of a door cracking open after years of thinking there was only wall. He changed into his robes in the cramped bathroom and didn't think about the fact that Dudley's old jeans had fit him fine for 3 years and these robes fit him perfectly, first try. He was learning not to question the small magics. The boats were something else entirely. For to a boat across the Black Lake, Hagrid's lantern a warm smear of gold ahead of them, and the castle rising from the water like something that had always been there waiting to be seen. Harry sat in the bow of his boat, and said nothing because there was nothing to say that wouldn't sound stupid. The boy next to him, Neville, round-faced and already gripping the sides like he expected the boat to capsize, breathed out a long, shaking exhale. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," Neville said quietly. "Me too," Harry said. Neville looked at him. "Really? Even you?" Harry didn't ask what even you meant. He suspected he'd be answering that question for the rest of his life. "Especially me." The castle swallowed them whole through a stone archway dripping with water, and then there was a dock and stairs and a corridor lit by torches, and then a very tall, very stern witch in emerald robes who introduced herself as Professor McGonagall and looked at all of them like she was already deciding which ones were going to give her trouble. Harry had a feeling she looked at him longest. The chamber they waited in was cold and full of nervous energy. 60 children discovering they were actually about to start their lives, the reality of it landing on them all at once. Harry stood near the back and watched. He'd always been good at that. Years of trying to be invisible in the Dursleys' house had made him very good at reading a room. There was a cluster of redheads near the door, the Weasley twins, loud and comfortable in their skin, already making 2 other boys laugh. Ron nearby, looking like he was rehearsing something in his head. Hermione Granger standing straight, and still like she was about to take an exam. A small, pale boy with silver blonde hair who moved through the room with the practiced ease of someone who'd always expected everyone to make space for him. Draco Malfoy, who tried to shake Harry's hand on the train and gone cold when Harry declined. And near the far wall, not quite with anyone, 2 girls. One of them was looking around with the bright, slightly overwhelmed expression of someone trying to memorize everything. Dark curls, ink already on her left hand, the kind of person who'd grown up hearing stories about this place and was checking the reality against the dream. The other one wasn't looking around at all. She was simply there. Still in a way that wasn't nervousness, it was composure, which was a different thing entirely. Dark blonde hair pulled back. Blue eyes that moved across the room in slow, deliberate sweeps, cataloging without performing. She wore her robes like they fit. She stood like she'd already decided where she was going to stand before she arrived. Harry looked at her for exactly 3 seconds before he made himself look away. He didn't know why 3 seconds felt like too long. Then McGonagall came back and told them about the sorting hat, and the ghosts came floating through the wall and made everyone shriek except for Malfoy and the still girl, and then they were moving, a column of first years filing through the doors into the great hall. The Great Hall was the most extraordinary thing Harry had ever seen, and he'd been in Diagon Alley and floated across a lake under a castle, so that was saying something. The enchanted ceiling showed the night sky, thick with stars. 4 long tables blazed with candlelight. Hundreds of older students turned to watch them come in, and the noise dropped to something that felt like the hell breathe before a wave breaks. Harry was near the front of the column, walking carefully, watching his feet so he didn't trip on the flagstones, when the person behind him stumbled. It happened in the compressed space between one heartbeat and the next. The column shuffled, someone from the side, a late-arriving student cutting in, misjudging the space, and the resulting jostle moved down the line like a struck bell. The boy just ahead of Harry lurched into him, Harry's foot caught wrong, and he went sideways, a hand caught his wrist. Not a grab. Not a rescue performed loudly. Just a hand closing around his wrist with a precise, firm grip, steadying him without stopping her own forward momentum. She let go half a second later, when he'd found his balance, and he turned blue eyes. The still girl. She was already looking forward again. "Watch the 3rd flag," she said, quiet enough that only he could hear. "It's uneven." That was all. "No, you're welcome." No smile. She was already 3 inches ahead of him, and the column was moving, and Harry, who had been touched so rarely in 11 years that he could count the instances, felt something happen. It started in his wrist where her hand had been. Not warmth exactly. More like resonance. Like a string plucked in a dark room. Something very old and very deliberate waking up in the bones of him, stretching out towards something it recognized. Harry pressed his lips together, and kept walking and told himself it was the nerves and the magic in the air and the ceiling full of stars. He was almost convinced. On the dais at the front, the Sorting Hat cleared its throat and began to sing, and Harry listened with half his attention and spent the other half noticing that the still girl stood 4 people to his left without looking at him at all. He watched the contract move across her face, or rather, the absence of it. She was very good at her face. But her right hand, the one that had caught him, curled slightly inward at her side. Just once. Like she was feeling something in her palm and didn't know what to do about it. Harry looked away before she could catch him watching. Abbott, Hannah, Hufflepuff. Bones, Susan, Hufflepuff. Boot, Terry, Ravenclaw. The names came and went and the hall thundered with applause at intervals, and Harry stood in the diminishing line of first years and thought about the thing in his wrist that still hadn't entirely gone away. Finch Fletchley to Hufflepuff. Finnegan, Seamus to Gryffindor. Granger, Hermione, a long pause, then Gryffindor, to Hermione's visible relief. Greengrass, Daphne. The still girl walked up without hurrying. She sat on the stool with her back straight, and her hands folded in her lap, and McGonagall lowered the hat over her head, and Harry watched without meaning to. The hat took 15 seconds. He'd watched it take nearly a minute on some of the others. On Daphne Greengrass it took 15 seconds, and then it opened its brim and said quite calmly, "Slytherin." And the Slytherin table erupted in applause that had a proprietary quality to it, of course, obviously as expected. Daphne Greengrass walked to the Slytherin table and sat down, and arranged her robes, and did not look at Harry Potter. Longbottom, Neville, the hat shouted Gryffindor before it fully settled on his head, which made the boy nearly fall off the stool in surprise. Harry caught his eye and grinned. Neville grinned back, dazed and delighted. Malfoy, Draco, the hat hadn't even touched his hair before it called Slytherin, and Draco walked to his table like he was accepting something owed. Moon. Not. Parkinson. Patil. Patil. Perks. Thomas. Potter, Harry. The hall went very quiet. Harry walked to the stool and sat down, and tried to look like he didn't notice the silence. The hat dropped over his eyes and the world went dark and warm, and then a voice spoke directly into the space behind his thoughts. Interesting, the hat said, with the dry tone of something that had been sorting students for 1,000 years and had seen everything and was still occasionally surprised. Very interesting. You've had a long 11 years, haven't you, Harry Potter? You could say that, Harry thought back. Plenty of courage. Good brain, too, underused. Loyal when you've been given reason to be. And something else. A pause. Something new, actually. The residue of old magic. Potter-Greengrass, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't felt that particular contract stir in, well, a very long time. Harry felt the hair on his arms rise under his robes. What contract? Not my place to say. I just sort. The hat sounded almost amused. Now, where to put you? Not Slytherin, despite what that old magic might prefer. You'd do well there, actually, better than most would guess, but your strongest thread is the other one. That stubborn, inconvenient, glorious thing that keeps making you reach out when you should pull back. You called it watching out for people, once. Your uncle called it freakishness. Both of them were describing the same thing, Harry thought, and surprised himself. Yes, the hat said, with something that might have been warmth. Exactly so. Then, aloud to the hall. Gryffindor! The noise that followed was spectacular. Harry pulled the hat off and handed it to McGonagall and walked to the Gryffindor table, where people were reaching across each other to clap him on the back, and he sat down next to Neville, who was still slightly dazed, and the thing in his wrist pulsed once, like a second heartbeat, and was still. He did not look at the Slytherin table. He lasted about 40 seconds. She was sitting next to the dark-haired girl from the chamber, Parkinson, Pansy, he remembered, and across from the Knot boy and a broad-shouldered Italian-looking boy who had the relaxed posture of someone who found the world perpetually amusing. She was eating. She was not looking at him. But there was the faintest tension in her jaw that hadn't been there during the boat ride, and her right hand was in her lap where he couldn't see it. Harry turned back to his plate, where food had appeared in the time he'd spent staring, and picked up his fork. Brilliant, isn't it? Neville said, gesturing at everything, and Harry laughed because yes, all right, yes it was. The feast was long and loud, and Harry ate more in one sitting than he normally did in 3 days at the Dursleys, which probably said something depressing that he chose not to think about. Percy Weasley, the prefect, Ron's older brother, pointed at things and explained them with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting years for a fresh audience. The Weasley twins across the table were involved in what appeared to be a dedicated campaign to smuggle food to their pockets, and they did it with the smooth coordination of people who had been doing this their whole lives. Ron appeared at the table after the sorting finished, flushed with relief at being Gryffindor, and immediately started eating with the unself-conscious appetite of someone with 6 siblings who had learned early that hesitation costs you the good rolls. What's it like? Ron asked, mouth half full. Being famous, I mean. Do you sorry, is that rude? Bit, Harry said, but I don't actually know. I didn't know I was famous until about 2 months ago. Ron stared at him. You're joking. My aunt and uncle didn't exactly pin up the headlines. Ron absorbed this with the expression of someone recalibrating. Right. Well, the short version is that you're famous because you're the only person who survived you-know-who. Which, the name's Voldemort, by the way, we're allowed to say it. Mom just doesn't like it, and everyone thought he was unbeatable, and then you stopped him when you were 1 year old, so? I was a baby, Harry said. I didn't exactly do much. Something happened, Ron said seriously. Whatever it was, it worked. He glanced at Harry's forehead, where the scar sat hidden under his fringe, then looked away with the courtesy of someone who wanted to ask but wasn't going to push. Harry liked him immediately for that. Across the room, and Harry was very deliberately not looking, except that there was a ripple of conversation at the Slytherin table. The dark-haired Italian boy said something low and amused, and the girl beside Daphne laughed, and Daphne herself tilted her head a fraction and said something back. Not a smile. But not nothing either. The boy caught Harry looking and raised an eyebrow with the smooth confidence of someone entirely comfortable being observed. Harry held his gaze for a beat, then looked away, which he thought was probably the right call. The feast ended with Dumbledore saying things that were profound and also slightly nonsensical. Nitwit. Blubber. Oddment. Tweak. And then they were moving again, prefects gathering their first years, the castle opening up around them. Harry followed Percy up a staircase that moved, past a corridor with suits of armor that watched them go, and up into the tower where Gryffindor lived. The common room was red and gold and warm, and he stood in the doorway for a moment and thought, this is mine now. Not the cupboard under the stairs. Not Dudley's second bedroom. This. The thought was so large and clean it almost hurt. Dormitories are through there, Percy said. Classes start Monday. Breakfast at 8. Don't be late. McGonagall does not consider the stairs moved to be an adequate excuse. He gave them all a stern look that was somewhat undercut by the fact that he was clearly enjoying himself enormously. Welcome to Gryffindor. The dormitory had 5 beds with red curtains and more space than Harry had ever had to himself. His trunk sat at the foot of his bed. Hedwig's empty cage sat on the nightstand. She'd gone ahead with the other owls. The other boys were already talking, already starting to become roommates, and Harry sat on the edge of his bed and took off his shoes. In his wrist, beneath the skin, something old and patient and very much alive settled into a slow, steady pulse. He pressed 2 fingers against the spot where her hand had gripped him. It felt, he didn't have a word for it, like a compass finding north. Like a word he'd forgotten that was coming back. You all right? Neville asked from the next bed, looking worried in his open, immediate way. Yeah, Harry said, and was surprised to find it was true. Yeah, I'm good. He lay back on the bed and looked at the canopy and listened to the castle settle around him, the distant crash of the moving staircases, the mutter of portraits, the way the wind off the lake pressed against the ancient stone, and thought about what the hat had said. Potter-Greengrass. I haven't felt that particular contract stir in a very long time. He fell asleep before he could decide what to do about it, and he dreamed, vaguely, in the unmemorable way of first-night dreams, of blue eyes and a hand that didn't let him fall. In the dungeons below, where the Slytherin dormitory ran alongside the lake and the windows showed nothing but dark green water and the occasional shadow of something very large moving through it, Daphne Greengrass sat on her bed with her back against the headboard and her knees drawn up and did not sleep. Pansy was already in the other bed, sprawled extravagantly, already making the small sounds that meant she dropped off the moment her head touched the pillow. Pansy had always been able to sleep anywhere. It was one of the things Daphne envied without ever saying so. Her right hand lay open on her knee. She turned it over. Turned it back. The skin looked perfectly ordinary. There was nothing to see. But she could still feel it, had felt it since the moment in the great hall, since her fingers had closed around his wrist without her even deciding to do it. Her body had simply reacted, faster than thought. Don't let him fall. She hadn't thought about who he was until after. She'd felt the lurch of someone going sideways and she'd reached out and then she'd let go and moved ahead, and it was only when she heard the silence fall over the hall, that peculiar, significant silence, and heard McGonagall call his name that her stomach had dropped 2 full inches. Potter, Harry. She'd watched him walk to the stool and sit down, and she'd folded her hands in her lap and kept her expression completely still and thought, well. Then the hat had taken 23 seconds on him, she'd counted, and during those 23 seconds her right palm had gone warm in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature in the hall, and when the hat opened its brim and shouted Gryffindor, and the hall had exploded and Harry Potter had walked to his table looking like someone trying very hard not to show that he was overwhelmed, she had felt something in her chest settle. Like a lock turning. She was 11 years old and she was methodical, and she came from a family that had practiced the art of maintaining composure through inconvenient magical developments for 9 generations, and she told herself that composure was appropriate here. She also told herself this 3 more times, which suggested she didn't entirely believe it. There were exactly 2 books she knew of that discussed the Greengrass Potter contract. One was in the family library at the Greengrass estate, behind the section on blood magic with the charmed lock that her mother had never seen fit to explain to her, but which Daphne had opened 2 years ago using the same basic logic she applied to most locked things: careful observation, patience, and the willingness to try every obvious possibility before resorting to creativity. The other book was probably in Gringotts, in the Potter Vault, assuming it hadn't been lost in the 11 years of no one managing that estate. She hadn't read either of them. She hadn't had to. She'd read enough about blood contracts in general to understand the shape of what had happened. Old families, old agreements, ancient magic with no patience for modern discomfort. The Greengrass Potter contract had been written 300 years ago, in a period when wizarding alliances worked differently, when contract meant something you sealed with magic instead of lawyers, when what you promised carried the weight of consequence. The contract, as best she understood, had been dormant for generations. Waiting. It required contact, she thought. To wake up, it required contact between bloodline heirs. Which meant that at every point in the last 300 years when a Greengrass and a Potter had been in the same room without touching, the contract had simply slept on. Waiting for an accident. Waiting for a stumble on flagstones in the Great Hall of Hogwarts. Waiting for her to reach out without thinking. Daphne stared at the green-lit water beyond the dormitory window and thought about what her mother was going to say when she found out, and then she thought about the boy in the Great Hall who'd gone still for a moment when she'd let go of him, really still, like someone hearing something unexpected, and who'd looked at her afterward with eyes that were green and direct and completely uninterested in performing anything for anyone. That part, she decided, was either going to make this much easier or much harder. She pulled her knees a little tighter and turned her hand over again and thought, this was an accident. And then, but I did choose not to let him fall. And the distinction between those two things felt important in a way she couldn't entirely articulate yet. She was very good at not being able to articulate things while still knowing exactly what they were. She pulled the curtains closed on her bed and let the sound of the water moving against the dungeon wall fill up the darkness, and told herself she would think about this in the morning when she was more composed. In her palm, something that felt like a slow, steady heartbeat, not her own, pulsed once, quietly, and was still. She held her hand against her breastbone and breathed. The first morning at Hogwarts was chaos. Not magical chaos, human chaos. 60 Gryffindor first-years trying to get dressed and find their schedules and navigate a castle that was, as Ron put it with the shell-shocked precision of someone confirming their worst suspicions, a lot bigger on the inside. The staircases had opinions. The portraits gave directions that were occasionally deliberate misdirections and occasionally just the result of a medieval witch having a very different conception of North. A suit of armor on the 3rd floor had apparently learned to reach out and grab people it found interesting, which was how Seamus Finnegan arrived at breakfast with a dent in his hat, and a story nobody entirely believed. Harry found the Great Hall by following the smell of bacon, which he was fairly sure was the most reliable navigation system in the castle regardless of what the portraits claimed. He sat next to Neville, across from Ron, and ate eggs and toast and looked at the Slytherin table for exactly the amount of time it took him to confirm that Daphne Greengrass was already there, eating with the same composed efficiency she brought to apparently everything, and then he looked at his schedule. Potions first, Ron said mournfully. With the Slytherins. How bad is Snape actually? Harry asked. Dad says well, Dad's not exactly unbiased, he doesn't love Slytherin generally, but the stories are pretty consistent. He's brilliant. He's also awful. Ron paused. Sometimes both at once, apparently. Hermione appeared across from them, schedule already memorized, bag already packed, radiating the energy of someone who had slept perfectly and read ahead. I've been looking at the potions syllabus, she said without preamble. It's quite advanced for first year. We start with theory, but by November we'll be attempting actual. It's the first day, Ron said. Preparation isn't a bad thing, Ronald. Ron looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has discovered, very quickly, that living with 6 siblings has not actually prepared him for all possible situations. Harry bit into his toast to hide his smile. He did not look at the Slytherin table again. He was very deliberate about it. And if the thing in his wrist pulsed twice during breakfast, once when he arrived and once when the Slytherin first years stood to leave, then that was between him and the ancient magic and nobody else. Potions was in the dungeons, which meant they crossed paths. Not literally. The Gryffindors and Slytherins arrived separately, from different corridors, and filed into the classroom on opposite sides with the automatic wariness of children who have already absorbed the political geography of their houses in 72 hours. But the doorway was narrow and there was a moment of shuffling, and Harry, who was near the front of the Gryffindor line, ended up standing 3 feet from Daphne Greengrass while they waited for Snape to open the door. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Gryffindor," she said, which was not a question. "Slytherin," he said, which also wasn't. "How's the tower?" "Warmer than the dungeon, I'd guess." "The dungeon has the lake view," she said. "There's something in it the size of a small building." "I know," Harry said. "We went past it in the boats." "The giant squid?" said the boy beside her, the Italian-looking one who'd caught Harry watching at the feast. He extended a hand with the relaxed ease of someone who'd practiced the social mechanics until they were completely natural. "Blaise Zabini. I already know who you are, so we can skip that part." Harry shook his hand. It felt normal. No resonance, no pulse. "Harry. And yes, let's skip it." Blaise smiled with something that might have been genuine. "You know, you're nothing like what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Shorter," Blaise said. "And more grateful." Harry laughed before he could stop himself. Beside Blaise, Daphne didn't quite smile, but the corner of her mouth shifted a very precise half-centimeter. Then Snape opened the door and the moment dissolved, and they filed into opposite sides of the classroom, and Severus Snape looked at all of them with eyes that had categorized and dismissed them before they'd sat down, and began. "There will be no foolish wand-waving in this classroom." His voice was quiet in the particular way that made rooms go quieter. "I can teach you how to bewitch the mind, ensnare the senses, bottle fame, brew glory, even stopper death, if you aren't the dunderheads most of you appear to be." He paused, letting that land. "Potter." His gaze moved to Harry with a precision that suggested he'd been waiting. "Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry didn't know. He had had 1 month of magical education and none of it was potions. He held Snape's gaze and said, "I don't know." Snape's expression said this was the answer he'd expected and found disappointing. "Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" "A stone taken from the stomach of a goat," Harry said. "It counteracts most poisons." Snape's lip curled. "You've read ahead. Aunt Petunia watches a lot of nature documentaries," Harry said. Bezos came up. There was a beat. Across the room, he caught a flicker of something on Daphne Greengrass's face, there and gone, and Blaise Zabini had his hand over his mouth. Snape did not appear amused. 5 points from Gryffindor for cheek." "I'll take it," Harry said, and heard several people around him suck in a breath. "I beg your pardon?" "I answered correctly," Harry said. "If that costs 5 points, I'll take it." He paused. "Sir?" The room was very quiet. Snape looked at him for a long moment with an expression Harry couldn't read, not the expected anger, which was interesting. Something more like assessment. Then he moved on to Hermione, who answered his next 3 questions at impressive length, and didn't take points from anyone else for the remainder of the lesson. Harry spent the class taking careful notes. He was aware, without looking, that Daphne Greengrass spent the class doing the same. At the end, when they were filing out, she fell into step beside him for exactly 4 paces, not by accident, he thought, and not quite by design, and said, without looking at him, "Bezos was correct. Asphodel and wormwood make the draught of living death." "You could have answered," Harry said. "It wasn't my question," she said, and then she was back with the Slytherins and he was back with the Gryffindors, and the corridors split them apart. "Who was that?" Ron asked, appearing at Harry's elbow with the radar of someone who notices social developments. "Daphne Greengrass," Harry said. "She's Slytherin." "I noticed." Ron looked like he had more to say about this and then thought better of it, which Harry appreciated. The first week settled into a rhythm that would have been overwhelming if Harry had let himself think about the whole shape of it at once. He'd learned early, thank you Dursleys, to deal with one thing at a time. So he learned the castle one floor at a time. He learned his professors one class at a time. He learned his housemates in the natural way of proximity and shared meals. More actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. The Claiming Touch. Chapter 2. The Ice and the Scar. The thing nobody told you about Hogwarts was that the magic was in the walls. Not metaphorically. Literally. Harry figured it out on the fourth day when he was running late to Transfiguration. The staircases had conspired against him in a way that felt personal, and he put his hand flat against the stone corridor wall to catch his breath, and the wall warmed under his palm. Just slightly. Just enough to notice. Like something very old saying, "I see you." He'd stood there for 3 seconds with his hand pressed against cold Scottish stone that wasn't quite cold anymore, and then he'd run to class and said nothing about it to anyone. He was learning to catalog the things that were probably unique to him. The list was getting long. The potions textbook fell open to the right page before he decided what he was looking for. His charms work produced sparks that were the specific shade of gold his mother's eyes had been in the only photograph he owned, which he knew was irrational but which felt true anyway. And his wand, his 11-inch holly wand with the phoenix feather, would sometimes hum at odd moments. Not when he was casting. In between. In the spaces. It hummed in charms the first Friday, and when he looked up, Daphne Greengrass was walking past the open classroom door without looking in. He hadn't even known she had charms at the same time. He turned back to his work and told himself it was a coincidence and practiced Wingardium Leviosa until his feather hit the ceiling, which made Flitwick squeak with delight and made Hermione look briefly, furiously impressed before she got her own feather to follow. The first Quidditch practice invitation arrived Thursday morning, a brief note from Oliver Wood that contained the words discretion and talent, and don't tell the other houses in a way that managed to be both flattering and slightly threatening. Harry had apparently been seen by Wood from a window during the brief period on Wednesday afternoon when he'd borrowed Ron's broom to retrieve Neville's Remembrall from wherever it had been kicked. He hadn't been trying to impress anyone. He just wanted to catch the thing before it hit the ground. "You were 30 feet up in about 4 seconds, Ron said at breakfast, not bothering to hide how impressed he was. "And you caught it with one hand. While turning." "It wasn't that high," Harry said. "Harry. I grew up with my brothers, 2 of whom are beaters. It was that high." Neville, across the table, was quietly eating his porridge with the expression of someone who felt responsible and wasn't sure whether to feel good or bad about how this had turned out. "I didn't mean to cause a whole thing," he said. "It wasn't a whole thing," Harry said. "McGonagall came out of nowhere," Neville said, "and I thought we were all in trouble, and then she took you away and I genuinely thought she was going to expel you on day 3. She put me on the Quidditch team," Harry said. "Youngest seeker in a century, apparently." Ron made a sound that was halfway between a groan and a cheer. "Mum's going to be furious I didn't get on first." "You're 11, Harry said. "So are you." This was, Harry reflected, an excellent point, and he still wasn't entirely sure how to feel about it. He'd gone from no broom to the Quidditch team in 72 hours, which was either a sign that things were going very well or that the universe was setting him up for something. He tended toward the latter. The Dursleys had taught him that good things required watching carefully. That afternoon, carrying his new Nimbus 2000, which he was still not over, which he suspected he would never be over, which was a broomstick so far beyond his previous experience of broomsticks that they might as well be different objects with the same name, toward the Quidditch pitch for his first practice, he rounded a corner and nearly walked directly into Draco Malfoy. Not nearly. Draco had clearly positioned himself to be unavoidable. He was standing in the middle of the corridor with Crabbe and Goyle flanking him in the way they always did, like punctuation marks made of muscle, and he had the expression of someone who'd prepared what he wanted to say. "A Nimbus 2000, Draco said, looking at the broom with the particular tone of someone who both wanted it and refused to admit wanting it. "Teacher's pet gets the special treatment." "McGonagall offered, I accepted," Harry said, and moved to go around him. Draco stepped sideways to block him. "You know, Potter, I've been thinking. You and I started off badly. That was your choice, on the train. He made it sound charitable. But there's still an opportunity here. For you to be in the right circles. The people who matter. Harry looked at him. Draco was pale and sharp-featured and clearly intelligent, and had spent 11 years being told that his intelligence plus his name plus his money meant something the rest of the world should acknowledge. He probably believed most of what he said. That was the thing about Draco. He wasn't performing. He just lived inside a story where he was the natural center, and anyone who didn't confirm that story was confusing to him. I'm going to practice, Harry said. You're going to regret making enemies before you understand what that means here, Draco said. There was something genuine under the performance, a warning that wasn't entirely self-interested. He was telling Harry something he thought was true. I'm not making an enemy, Harry said. I'm going to practice. Those are different things. See you around, Malfoy. He walked past. Crabbe and Goyle shuffled uncertainly, looking at Draco, who hadn't moved. Harry kept walking at exactly the same pace and didn't look back. 20 feet down the corridor he passed the entrance to a side passage and Blaise Zabini materialized from it the way cats materialize from shadows, as if he'd always been there and you'd simply failed to notice. That was either brave or stupid, Blaise said, falling into step beside him without any indication that this was unusual. Bit of both, probably, Harry said, and then realized he didn't know why he was talking to a Slytherin he'd spoken to exactly once, and then realized he didn't actually mind. Were you watching? I was nearby, Blaise said. I often am. It's a useful thing to be. He glanced at the Nimbus with openly covetous eyes before pulling his expression back to neutral. Can I give you a piece of advice? Not Draco's advice, which is interested advice. Genuinely neutral advice. Sure. In Slytherin, what you did with Snape on day one, not backing down, but also not being aggressive about it, that plays well. It shows you have spine without showing you want to fight. He paused. In Gryffindor it probably plays fine too. But with Draco specifically, not engaging is worse than fighting. He doesn't know what to do with people who won't play the game. That seems like his problem, Harry said. It will become yours, Blaise said without malice. He's not stupid. He's also not going away. And his father has a long reach. He stopped walking. They'd reached the point where the corridor split toward the Quidditch pitch. I'm telling you this because Daphne would want you to have accurate information. Harry stopped. Turned. She sent you? She absolutely did not send me. She would be appalled if she knew I was here. Which is why she's not going to find out. Blaise smiled, quick, genuine, the smile of someone who found the world funny in a way he kept mostly to himself. She also won't directly tell you anything useful for at least several more weeks, so consider me a translation service. Harry looked at him for a moment. What does she want? Blaise's expression shifted to something more careful. She wants to understand what happened at the sorting before she decides what to do about it. She's like that. She doesn't move until she has complete information. He tilted his head. What do you want? The same thing, probably, Harry said. Blaise nodded slowly. Good. That's actually the ideal answer. He stepped back toward the other corridor. Nice broom, by the way. Don't break your neck. He disappeared around the corner with the unhurried ease of someone who had somewhere better to be. Harry stood in the corridor for a second, then went to practice. Flying was the clearest Harry's head ever got. Up on the Nimbus, 40 feet above the Quidditch pitch in the pale September afternoon, with the wind cutting through his robes and Oliver Wood shouting plays from below and the snitch, the quick, golden, barely visible snitch, somewhere in the air around him, there was no room for anything else. No Dursleys. No famous scar. No thing in his wrist that pulsed at inconvenient moments. Just speed and air and the specific satisfaction of his body knowing exactly what to do. He found the snitch 17 times in 2 hours, from increasingly difficult positions, and by the end Wood was looking at him with the expression of a man who has found religion. You're a natural, Wood said, which Harry had heard before but which didn't feel less strange. "I've been waiting 4 years for a seeker like this." "For years, Potter." "I know, you mentioned it," Harry said, slightly out of breath, and grinned. He was still grinning when he walked back up to the castle in the early evening light, broom over his shoulder, and collided with a completely different situation. The courtyard just before the main entrance, Neville backed against the wall with his arms folded in, trying to make himself smaller, which was a posture Harry recognized in his bones. 2 Slytherin boys, 4th years, heavy enough to make the size difference significant, with the relaxed cruelty of people who'd done this before. Taking up space. Talking just loud enough to be words but not loud enough to be heard clearly from a distance. Harry walked into the courtyard without changing his pace. "Think a squib would get into Hogwarts, actually. Must have bribed someone, hey?" Harry said. The 4th years looked at him. There was the automatic calculation people did when they saw him, the scar, the name, and then the immediate question of whether that changed things. For this particular pair, apparently it didn't. Or rather, they'd committed to the moment, and backing out now would cost them something. "Walk away, Potter," the larger one said. "This isn't about you." "It's my courtyard too," Harry said. He hadn't raised his voice. He was still holding his broom. "And he's my friend. He's a first year who nearly broke a cauldron in potions and made Snape dock 30 points off Gryffindor," the other one said, with the specific contempt of older students who'd felt that deficit. "People are allowed to have bad days in potions," Harry said. "Snape's room does that to people. You're going to want to know," Harry said very simply. Something in his tone, not anger, not aggression, just complete solidity, made the larger 4th year blink. Because there wasn't anything to push against. No nervousness to prey on, no desperation to exploit. Harry was just standing there, broom over his shoulder, stating facts. He'd learned early that bullies needed friction to function. Give them none, and they had nothing to work with. "You're 11, the 4th year said, but there was less certainty in it now. "And I have nothing going on tonight," Harry said pleasantly. "So we can stand here as long as you want." They left. Not fast, they took their time, because leaving too fast would cost them something too, but they left, and Neville let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a while. "You didn't have to, I know," Harry said. "They're not going to, I know that too." Harry shrugged. "You all right?" Neville was quiet for a moment. "I really did break the cauldron," he said. "Snape made the whole class watch me clean it up," he said. He stopped. "He said some things?" "Yeah, well, Snape says some things to everyone," Harry said. "Come on. Rom have eaten all the good biscuits from the common room if we don't go up." He clapped Neville once on the shoulder and walked toward the entrance, and Neville followed, and the thing in Harry's wrist, which had been quiet all through practice, did something he hadn't felt before. It pulsed twice, in quick succession, and then went warm. He glanced at his wrist. Nothing to see. Just skin. He kept walking. The castle's library was enormous and eccentric, and Harry found, over the following week, that it was also one of the best places to think. He went on a Sunday, late in their 3rd week, when Ron had gone to watch his brothers at Quidditch practice and Neville was in the greenhouse and Hermione was, well, Hermione was also in the library, but in a different wing, pursuing what appeared to be a personal campaign to read everything before Christmas. They passed each other near the reference section and exchanged nods in the comfortable way of people who've realized they can exist in the same space without needing to perform friendship every moment. Harry found a table near the window with the low Scottish light coming through, and opened the book he checked out 2 days ago, A Comprehensive Guide to Magical Contracts and Blood Agreements, 3rd edition, and started reading. He'd found it by searching the catalog for anything related to what the hat had said. He'd tried Potter-Greengrass first, which found nothing. Then Blood Contracts, which found several volumes, this being the most recent and accessible. He was 60 pages in and had identified 2 things. First, blood contracts were genuinely complex pieces of ancient magic, not just agreements but structures, something woven into the magic of the families involved with a permanence that made most modern magical contracts look like handshakes. Second, most of the specific information about any given contract was held in the family vaults, not in publicly available books. He was on page 74, reading about dormancy conditions, when someone sat down across from him. He looked up. Daphne Greengrass set 3 books on the table, arranged them in a precise row, and pulled out a piece of parchment for notes, before she acknowledged him with anything more than occupying the same space. "You've been in here 4 times this week," she said, not looking up from her parchment. "It's a library," Harry said. "I like it. You were in the restricted section corridor on Thursday." He looked at her. "How do you know that?" She did look up then, and the blue eyes were direct in the way he was learning to read, not cold, just precise. She meant exactly what she said and said exactly what she meant, and the precision was so consistent that it had started to read as its own kind of warmth. "Because I was also in the restricted section corridor on Thursday. Were you looking for the same thing I was?" A pause. "What were you looking for?" "You first," Harry said. She considered this. "Greengrass family contract documentation. Our family copy is at home, but the library has a general catalog of registered blood agreements. It's in the restricted section because most of the families involved don't want the existence known." She paused. "You were there for the same reason." "The hat mentioned it," Harry said. "During the sorting. It said Potter-Greengrass and that it hadn't felt the contract stir in a long time." She was still. Very still. The kind of stillness that wasn't emptiness. It was a full room with a locked door. "The hat said that." "Yes. The hat is supposed to keep sorting conversations private." "I know," Harry said. "I don't think it was trying to tell me. It was more like, it just slipped out. Like it was surprised too." He watched her process this. "You already knew about the contract." "I discovered it 2 years ago," she said. "The restricted section catalog has a brief entry. Name of the contract, parties involved, date of writing, dormancy status. It listed the Potter-Greengrass agreement as dormant." She set her quill down with the precise motion of someone making a decision. "Until 4 days ago, when I came back to check and the status had changed." Harry felt the hair on his arms rise. "It changed?" "The entry now reads active. Condition of activation, first blood contact between current heirs. It updated the moment we—" She stopped. Pressed her lips together. "Contact," she said. "First contact between heirs activates it. Which means my reaching out in the Great Hall was exactly what it was waiting for." Harry finished. The silence between them had a different quality from silence in an empty room. Something alive in it. "I need to read the full contract," she said. "What it actually does. What it requires. What it doesn't." She met his eyes. "And you need to read it too. So we're working with the same information. How do we get it? The full text? Your family vault at Gringotts will have a copy. I can write home for hours." She picked up her quill again. "I'm writing tonight. I'd suggest you write to whoever manages the Potter estate." Harry nodded slowly. "Do you know what it does already? Even approximately?" "It amplifies," she said. "I've read enough general contract theory to know that much. Blood agreements between major families were designed for alliance, political, magical, military. The magic they create reinforces both parties. Makes them stronger in proximity. Gives them certain forms of awareness of each other." She said this last part with the careful neutrality of someone who's decided that careful neutrality is the appropriate register. "Awareness," Harry said. "Awareness," she confirmed, equally neutral. They both looked at their books. Harry had been feeling her walk into the library for the last 3 weeks, in the specific sense that something in him settled when she was in the same building and went slightly less settled when she wasn't. He categorized this, filed it, and declined to discuss it, which was apparently the same approach she'd taken from the other side. "Right," he said. "I'll write to Gringotts." "Good." She drew a line on her parchment. I also want you to know, she said with the brisk efficiency of someone delivering a formal position, that this wasn't deliberate on my part. The contact. I know, he said. I don't. She paused. I don't want you to think you've been maneuvered into something. Harry looked at her steadily. He'd spent his whole life being maneuvered into things by people who meant well and people who didn't, and he knew the difference by now between the texture of manipulation and the texture of honesty. She was deeply honest. It came off her like a temperature. You didn't let me fall, he said. That's not manipulation. That's just, you decided not to let someone fall, and the ancient magic hiding in both our bloodlines woke up. It's an inconvenient sequence of events. He picked up his quill. It doesn't mean you owe me an explanation. She looked at him for a moment. You're very easy to talk to, she said, with the tone of someone identifying an unexpected complication. You're the first person to say that, Harry said. Usually people find me confusing. I find you very easy to read, she said, going back to her parchment. Which is also, for the record, a complication. Harry hid his smile behind his book. In his wrist, the pulse did something it hadn't done before. It ran warm and quick up through his forearm and settled somewhere near his sternum, not unpleasantly. He was really going to need that Gringotts letter. He wrote it that night at the desk in the Gryffindor dormitory, while Ron snored gently in the next bed and Neville's curtains moved with the breathing of deep sleep. He wrote to the Potter estate manager at Gringotts, asking about any family documentation regarding a contract with the Greengrass family, and then he stared at the ceiling for a while before he wrote a second, shorter note. He sent both with Hedwig, who took the assignment with the aristocratic composure of an owl who understood importance. The response came back in 3 days. There was a sealed envelope from the Gringotts goblin responsible for the Potter vault, formal, brief, indicating that the vault did indeed contain contract documentation, that as of current heir Harry James Potter he was entitled to access it, and that any visit to Gringotts could be arranged at his convenience. Enclosed was a single sheet of parchment that appeared to be a précis, a legal summary of the contract's existence and basic terms, probably extracted from the vault documentation for exactly this kind of heir inquiry. Harry unfolded it carefully. Potter-Greengrass Blood Agreement, established 1692. Parties: House Potter, represented by Edmund Caius Potter, and House Greengrass, represented by Ilaria Sophia Greengrass, née Blackwood. Purpose: alliance of magic and blood between two ancient houses of significant standing, to be activated upon first willing contact between designated heirs in each generation. Willing contact, Harry noted. Not just contact. He turned it over in his mind. Terms of the activated agreement are as follows. 1. Enhancement. The magical capabilities of both bound heirs will develop in mutual reinforcement. Proximity amplifies this effect. 2. Awareness. Bound heirs will possess a degree of emotional and physical awareness of each other, specifically in moments of significant distress or danger. This awareness is not invasive and cannot be used for coercion. 3. Permanence. The agreement cannot be dissolved unilaterally. Dissolution requires the willing consent of both parties and is subject to standard blood contract dissolution protocols. 4. The mortal clause. If one bound heir is in mortal danger, the other will know. This awareness transcends distance and cannot be suppressed. The agreement carries no compulsion of feeling, action, or loyalty beyond what develops naturally between the parties. It recognizes either party as superior to the other. It does not specify romantic or marital terms. It is, at its most fundamental, an agreement that one Potter and one Greengrass will be known to each other. Harry sat with this for a long time. Willing contact. She'd reached out and caught him on purpose, not planned, not calculated, but in that split second, chosen. The contract had recognized something in the choice. He folded the paper carefully and put it in the front pocket of his trunk, where he could find it again without searching. The second time Draco moved against him, it was smarter. The Gryffindor versus Slytherin matchup in charms, same class, divided down the middle of the room, was ostensibly fine. Flitwick paired students across house lines specifically to discourage what he called comfortable mediocrity, which they all understood to mean he didn't want anyone only competing against people at the same level. Harry was paired with a quiet Slytherin girl named Millicent Bulstrode, who turned out to be surprisingly good at Lumos and who didn't particularly want to talk, both of which Harry respected. Draco's move came at the end of class, when they were packing up. He didn't do anything to Harry. He stopped near Neville's desk, very casually, while Neville was putting his wand away, and he said, loudly enough for the area to hear but quietly enough to deny if challenged, "It's interesting, Longbottom, that the most a cauldron can hold is whatever you put in it. Some things just aren't built for more than that." It was a precise piece of social cruelty. Not a direct attack. Not anything Flitwick could call out without looking like he'd misheard. Just a thing said in public about a person who already doubted himself, with an audience to make it land properly. Neville went very still and didn't look up from his bag. Harry, 3 desks over, put his book down. "Malfoy," he said, conversationally. The whole area's attention shifted. Draco looked at him with the expression of someone who'd expected a reaction and was ready for it. "Potter, you know what I've noticed about people who make jokes about other people's ability?" Harry said. He kept his voice level and genuinely curious sounding. "They're always about 3 steps behind the person they're mocking. Neville had one bad day in potions in his first week. You've been perfectly fine in potions, but you can't seem to get Wingardium Leviosa right without Crabbe catching your feather." He paused. "I'm not criticizing. It's early days. I just think the joke isn't very well chosen." The room's attention had weight. Draco's expression had shifted, not hurt, he was too practiced for that, but recalibrated. He looked at Harry with something sharper than his usual easy contempt. "You should be careful," Draco said quietly, and now he wasn't performing for the room, he was talking to Harry specifically. "Who you make enemies of. You said that in the corridor last week," Harry said. "I notice you said the same thing. It doesn't seem to be getting more effective." He picked up his bag and walked out. In the corridor, Neville caught up with him, his round face cycling through several emotions. "You didn't have to, I know," Harry said. "But he was wrong, so. He's going to make trouble." "He was going to make trouble anyway," Harry said. "Might as well give him an accurate reason." 20 feet behind them, the classroom door opened and the Slytherin students came out. Harry didn't look back, but he heard, very briefly, the cool and carrying voice of Daphne Greengrass. "Draco. Walk with me." And then something quieter, which he didn't catch. Blaise materialized at Harry's left with the ease of long practice. "She's telling him," Blaise said quietly, "that making an enemy of you in week 3 is politically premature and that his father will want him to gather information before taking positions." "Is that true?" Harry asked. "Probably. It's also the argument most likely to get through to him." Blaise glanced sideways at Harry. "She's not doing it for you." "I know," Harry said. "She's doing it because Draco picking fights with you in public creates attention around." He stopped. "Around things she'd rather weren't public yet. The contract. She doesn't want it known. Not yet. Not until she understands it fully." Blaise walked with them a few more steps. "I'm going to ask you something directly." "All right." "The thing you feel," Blaise said carefully, "in the last week or 2. Has it gotten stronger?" Harry looked at him. Blaise met the look with complete seriousness, no performance in it. "Yes," Harry said. Blaise nodded. "So has hers," he said. "I notice things. It's what I do." He peeled off toward the Slytherin wing. "Write to Gringotts if you haven't," he added, over his shoulder. "And maybe keep your head down for a bit. The next few weeks are going to be interesting." "Define interesting," Neville said, watching him go. "He means the bad kind," Harry said. The interesting part arrived on a Thursday. Defense against the dark arts, the class that should, by all logic, have been the best, was a sustained exercise in profound disappointment. Professor Quirrell smelled like garlic and taught from his textbook in a voice that apologized for its own existence, and Harry had spent 5 classes now watching Quirrell flinch at his own subject material. But this Thursday, something was different. It started during a lesson on basic shield theory, how magical defense created a boundary between the caster and incoming magic, when Quirrell put them into pairs to practice the wand motions. Harry, paired with Seamus, ran through the motion 3 times and then did something that surprised him. The shield held. Not in the usual first-year way, where you got a shimmer and a basic deflection. This shield was dense. It had texture. When Seamus's practice jinx hit it, the shield didn't just absorb it, it redirected, sending the jinx sideways into the wall where it left a scorch mark that Quirrell stared at for an uncomfortably long moment. That's very good, Potter," Quirrell said. "Sorry about the wall," Harry said. Yes. Fine." Quirrell was still looking at the scorch mark. Then he looked at Harry, and there was something in his eyes that Harry couldn't immediately categorize, something that had nothing to do with nervousness about teaching. Just for a second. Then it was gone. Harry thought about it all the way back to Gryffindor Tower. The spell work was getting stronger. He noticed it building, the shield today, but also last week in Charms when his Wingardium Leviosa had lifted not just his own feather but had apparently pulled Seamus's feather 3 feet sideways without him trying. In Transfiguration, his match had become a needle before he'd consciously pushed the intention, like the magic was anticipating him. He sat at his desk in the dormitory and thought about the contract sheet. Enhancement. The magical capabilities of both bound heirs will develop in mutual reinforcement. Proximity amplifies this effect. He and Daphne had been in the same castle, with some proximity, for nearly 4 weeks. The contract had been active since the night they arrived. He wasn't scared. That surprised him. He thought he probably should be, given that the power in his spellwork was moving fast past what his first-year textbooks could account for. But it didn't feel uncontrolled. It felt like a larger version of him. Like standing in a room and discovering you're taller than you thought. He took out a fresh piece of parchment. He thought for a moment about what to write, and then he wrote, "The shield redirected. Thought you should know. HP." He stared at it. Then he added, "How's yours?" He tied it to Hedwig's leg. She looked at it, then at him, with the long-suffering patience of an owl who had expected, when she'd signed on for this partnership, to primarily carry letters to other people's owls, not short notes to Slytherins 2 floors below her. "I know," he told her. "Take the long way. Don't make it obvious." She left through the dormitory window with wounded dignity. The response came the next morning before breakfast, slipped under the dormitory door by what Harry assumed was a very discreet castle owl, written in handwriting that was exactly as precise as everything else about her. "My transfiguration work is at 5th-year equivalent Proflytics reference guides. My shielding produces heat. This is apparently not standard. I visited the restricted section catalog yesterday. The entry now includes a note it didn't have before. Enhancement rate accelerates with significant emotional events. Something to keep in mind. DG." Below that, a single line in slightly different ink, like it had been added after the rest. "The shield redirecting is advanced. Well done." Harry read it twice. Then he folded it and put it with the Gringotts Précis in the front of his trunk, where the important things were. In his chest, the quiet pulse that had been there since the sorting beat steadily, like something that had always been there and was only now making itself known. He went down to breakfast and didn't tell anyone and ate 3 pieces of toast and thought about ancient magic and choices, and the way a still person in a loud room could be the most interesting thing in it, and when Ron said, "You're quiet," he said, "just thinking about defense." Which was technically true. Outside, the Scottish autumn was properly cold now, stripping the trees on the castle grounds bare. Inside, somewhere in the dungeons, something was happening in the stones of the castle itself. If you knew how to listen, if you pressed your hand against the right wall, something that wasn't exactly warmth. More like recognition. More like, "I see you both." Chapter 3, Old Magic, older names Halloween arrived the way it always did at Hogwarts, with decoration that bordered on aggressive. Pumpkins the size of garden sheds lined the great hall. The enchanted ceiling showed a sky bruised purple and orange, and somewhere Peeves had gotten hold of a supply of trick candles that screamed when you tried to blow them out, which McGonagall was addressing with the quiet, absolute fury of someone who had been dealing with Peeves for 30 years and had not yet found a solution that held. Harry noticed none of this particularly. He was watching Quirrell. He'd been watching Quirrell for 2 weeks, since the defense class with the shield. The thing he'd seen in Quirrell's eyes, that flash of something that didn't match the nervous, apologetic surface, had been bothering him in the persistent, low-level way that meant his instincts had filed it under unresolved and kept returning to the folder. Quirrell at the Halloween feast ate nothing. He sat at the staff table with his turban slightly askew and his eyes moving over the students in slow, methodical sweeps that had nothing to do with the genial monitoring of a teacher watching his charges enjoy a holiday meal. "You've been staring at the staff table for 5 minutes," Ron said, reaching past him for more roasted parsnips. "Quirrell," Harry said. Ron glanced up. "What about him?" "Something's off." Ron considered this with the generous pragmatism of someone who'd grown up around magical eccentricity. "Dad says he was fine before his year off. Went somewhere in Eastern Europe, came back weird. Mom thinks he had a bad experience with a vampire." "It's not vampire weird," Harry said. "It's something else." "Harry," Ron said, with the patient tone of someone who's had this kind of conversation with Fred and George too many times to count. "It's Halloween. Can we be slightly less investigative about the professor, and slightly more focused on the excellent pudding?" Harry looked at the pudding. It was, admittedly, excellent. He ate the pudding and kept the thought about Quirrell in its folder, and told himself to let it sit. Across the hall, the Slytherin table was doing what the Slytherin table always did, which was maintaining a slightly different quality of noise from the other 3, lower, more contained, with the undertone of people who'd been raised to understand that visible enthusiasm was a social liability. Daphne was between Blaze and the Knot Boy, eating steadily, and when Pansy leaned over to say something to her she tipped her head in the slight way she did when she was acknowledging information without committing to a position. Harry caught himself cataloging this with a level of detail that was, objectively, probably too much. He turned back to his pumpkin juice. He and Daphne had been in a careful equilibrium for 2 weeks. The library on Sundays, brief exchanges in shared corridors, and the notes, which had continued with a consistency that neither of them had formally agreed to and neither seemed inclined to stop. The notes were almost entirely about the contract and its effects. Almost entirely. Occasionally one of them sensed something that wasn't. She'd sent him a page from a book about Quidditch positioning theory with a margin note that said your recovery roll in last Tuesday's practice is textbook. You should read this. He'd sent back the page with his own margin note. How do you know about my recovery roll? And she'd written back, on a separate piece of parchment, the pitch is visible from the astronomy tower. I was there for a different reason. He had not asked what the different reason was. He was learning her the way you learn a language, not as a series of rules but as a rhythm. She didn't volunteer information but she answered questions. She didn't perform indifference but she was genuinely selective about what she cared about. She was fiercely, precisely kind, but she did it sideways so you didn't notice until after. The feast wound down and the noise in the hall began its natural evening descent, and that was when the dungeon door flew open. Quirrell staggered in. Not the usual Quirrell shuffle. This was something else. A man moving like something was pushing him from behind, his face white and his turban crooked and his eyes showing too much white. He grabbed the edge of the nearest table for support, and the room went very quiet very fast. Troll! Quirrell shouted. In the dungeons! Thought you should know! And then he collapsed. The next 30 seconds were the most chaotic Harry had experienced since arriving at Hogwarts, which was saying something. Dumbledore had the school in motion before the screaming properly started, prefects up, younger students out, teachers deploying through separate doors. McGonagall's voice cut through the noise like a blade and got the Gryffindors moving. Harry was swept up in the crowd of his house, carried toward the dormitory stairs in the crush of bodies, and it was only when they were halfway up the first staircase that Ron grabbed his arm. "Hermione," Ron said, with a horror Harry felt 2 seconds after. "What about? She doesn't know. She's in the bathroom on the 2nd floor. She didn't come to the feast." Ron's face had gone the specific color of someone doing the math and not liking the answer. "The trolls in the dungeons. If it gets out, go," Harry said, already turning back. They went the wrong way through the evacuating crowd and down 2 sets of stairs, and Harry was focused entirely on directions and the layout of the 2nd floor when he came around a corner near the library and nearly ran directly into someone going the opposite direction, quickly, alone. "Daphne." She stopped. He stopped. They were both breathing fast. "Where are you?" She started. "2nd floor bathroom," he said. "Hermione's there. She doesn't know about the troll." Daphne's eyes did a rapid, practical calculation. "The troll, they said dungeons, which is where your dormitory is," Harry said, and felt something seize hard in his chest that had nothing to do with the contract. She saw it on his face. "I'm not going to my dormitory," she said, with a brisk clarity that was profoundly reassuring. "I was going to find." She stopped. "You." She said it like she was acknowledging something slightly inconvenient. "I was going to find you." "The awareness," he said. "Something felt urgent," she said. "Yes." She straightened. "2nd floor bathroom. Let's go." There was no discussion of whether this was a good idea or whether she should go back to her house or what it meant that they were running through an evacuating castle together. She just turned and went, and Harry and Ron went with her, and that was the decision made. The 2nd floor corridor was dim and empty and smelled of something Harry couldn't immediately identify, then could, because the smell was getting stronger, and it was rank and earthy and animal in a way that made the hair on his arms stand straight. Ron made a sound that was mostly involuntary. "That's close," Daphne said very quietly. The door to the girls' bathroom was 20 feet ahead. But the smell was coming from their left, from the cross corridor. Harry held up a hand and they all stopped. Something moved at the far end of the cross corridor. 12 feet tall. Club the size of a tree trunk. Moving with the dense, terrible momentum of something that weighed that much and wasn't in a hurry because it had never in its life needed to be in a hurry. The mountain troll turned its head toward them with the slow curiosity of a creature that hadn't yet decided whether they were worth its attention. Then it saw them. Then it decided. "Bathroom," Harry said. "Now. Get Hermione and—" The troll moved. 14 feet tall became very fast very suddenly, and Harry grabbed the nearest thing, which was a suit of armor from the alcove beside him, and threw it. He didn't think about throwing it. It was 20 times his weight, and he was 11, and he threw it with both hands, and it connected with the troll's shoulder with an impact that knocked the creature sideways into the corridor wall, and the crash shook the floor. Ron made a sound entirely beyond words. Daphne made no sound, but Harry saw her wand out and already moving. "Bathroom," he said again. "Get her out." Ron ran. Daphne didn't. "I'm not leaving," she said, which was not an argument, it was a statement of what was happening. The troll recovered from the suit of armor with the offended outrage of something that was not used to being hit. It turned back toward them and raised its club, and Harry did the only thing that seemed logical. He ran directly at it. He heard Daphne make a sound that was probably surprise and possibly alarm, but by that point he was already moving, and the troll swung its club and he dropped under it. The air from the swing was a physical thing, displaced and huge, and rolled across the corridor floor and came up behind its left knee, and then he had no plan whatsoever. What happened next was entirely instinct. He grabbed the troll's leg. His hands went around the rough, cold skin above the ankle, and something happened that wasn't quite a decision. It was more like the magic recognizing the moment and moving before he did. A pulse ran from his hands into the creature, a flash of something that wasn't a spell he knew because he hadn't studied it or practiced it or named it. The troll lurched. Its legs buckled. It went sideways like a building being demolished. Harry let go and moved, and it missed him by 4 feet, which was not a lot, but was enough. The corridor floor shook when it landed. In the ringing aftermath, something glowed. Harry looked at his hands. There was a faint light in his palms, gold white, fading quickly, guttering out in the 3 seconds he watched it. He turned his hands over. Nothing. Ordinary hands. He looked at Daphne. She was standing 6 feet away, and she was glowing too. Not visibly, not to an outside observer, he didn't think. But he could see it, the same way he could feel the castle's warmth through stone walls. She had light in her, pulsing from her sternum outward, the same gold white, the same frequency as what had been in his hands. Her eyes were wide. That was the most expression he'd seen on her face. "Harry?" Ron's voice from the bathroom doorway. "What?" He stopped when he saw the troll. "Bloody hell." Hermione was behind him, pale and clutching her bag to her chest. She looked at the troll, then at Harry, then at his hands, then at Daphne, and Harry could see her filing it all into categories she didn't yet have the vocabulary for. "Is it dead?" Ron asked. "Knocked out," Harry said. He could hear it breathing, which was enormous and terrible. "For now. We should go." "What did you?" Ron gestured at the troll. "I don't know," Harry said honestly. "We should go now." McGonagall came around the corner with Snape and Quirrell 30 seconds later, wand out and looking like someone who had expected to deal with the crisis tonight and had still been surprised by the specific shape of it. She stopped when she saw the troll. She stopped again when she saw all 4 of them. "What, in Merlin's name?" She composed herself with visible effort. "Potter. Weasley. Miss Granger." Her eyes settled on Daphne. "Miss Greengrass." "The troll came toward us," Daphne said before anyone else could speak. Harry intervened. "It's unconscious." McGonagall looked at the troll, which was the size of a small building and currently occupying most of the corridor. "With what?" "His hands," Ron said helpfully. McGonagall looked at Harry's hands. "Harry put them in his pockets." "I grabbed it," he said. "It fell." "It fell." McGonagall's voice had the tone of someone who understood the statement was technically accurate and fundamentally insufficient. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she looked at Daphne, and then she looked between them with the expression of a very intelligent woman noticing something she wasn't being told and filing it for later. 5 points each to Gryffindor and Slytherin, she said, for courage, however profoundly misjudged. She took 10 off immediately for being out of their dormitories, which Harry thought was fair. "Get back to your houses. Now. All of you." Behind her, Quirrell was looking at the troll with an expression Harry couldn't read, something that was either fear or something else wearing fear's face. Snape was looking at Harry. Harry met Snape's gaze and held it, and what he saw in Snape's eyes was not the usual calculated unpleasantness. There was something considering in it. Something that Harry had no framework for yet. He turned away first, not because he was intimidated, but because there was nothing more to say. They split at the staircase, Daphne going down to the dungeons, Harry and the Gryffindors going up. Ron and Hermione were processing loudly, which involved Ron gesticulating and saying things like "your hands" and Hermione saying things like the magical discharge reading would have been and then stopping because she didn't have the vocabulary yet. Harry walked through it and up the stairs and through the portrait hole and into the common room, and then he sat in the chair nearest the fire and looked at his hands. "Harry," Neville said from the corner, where he'd been sitting with a book looking like someone who'd spent the last hour trying to appear calm. "Are you all right?" Everyone came back saying there was a troll and some of the older students were saying, "I'm fine," Harry said. "The troll's in the second-floor corridor." "Out cold." Neville stared. "What? How? Magic?" Harry said, which was both entirely accurate and entirely useless. He went to bed early, citing the troll-related evening as sufficient reason, and Ron covered for him in the way that was becoming natural, a brief, truthful account that somehow managed not to include anything about Daphne Greengrass, which Harry would thank him for later. In the dormitory, he lay on his back and looked at the canopy and thought about the light in his palms and the identical light pulsing from her sternum in that corridor, and about the contract sheet that said enhancement rate accelerates with significant emotional events. His hands had knocked a troll sideways. She'd been in the corridor, 20 feet away, her magic pulsing in sync with his. He was 11 years old and magic he hadn't named yet was moving through him like weather, and the only thing that felt stable about it was the quiet heartbeat in his wrist that had been there since September 1st. He pressed his fingers against it. It beat back, steady and certain, like something that had always known where it was going. 2 things arrived Friday morning. The first was a letter from Gringotts, not the estate manager this time but a senior account goblin named Ragnarok, which Harry understood meant this was being taken seriously. The letter indicated that the Potter Vault documentation was extensive and that they strongly recommended an in-person visit, which could be arranged via the Hogwarts Flu connection during any Hogsmeade weekend. The second thing was a folded piece of parchment left on the end of his bed, tucked under his pillow so it had clearly arrived while he slept, which meant either a house elf or the castle itself had delivered it. He unfolded it. "You should know what you did last night" is in the general category of what theory texts call raw channel discharge. It happens when the contract's accumulated enhancement has nowhere to go and a significant enough event forces it to release all at once. The light you saw was both of us at once. Same frequency. The books call it resonance manifestation and describe it as extremely rare. It only happens when both parties are present and under equivalent stress. DGPS. The troll was 12 feet. I know it felt bigger. DG below that, in different ink, I was afraid for you when you ran at it. I want to note that for the record because I think accuracy is important. DG Harry read the postscript 3 times. Then he folded the parchment and put it in his trunk with the others and went to breakfast, and sat down, and ate, and when Ron said, "You look like you're thinking about something," he said, "I'm always thinking about something," which made Ron laugh, and the morning resumed. He didn't write back immediately. He thought about what he wanted to say and took his time about it, which he understood was what she would want him to do. She'd written something precise and true and she wasn't asking for a response. Exactly, she was being accurate, which was her version of open. He wrote back after charms, "Thank you for staying in the corridor. You didn't have to. I know you know that. HP." He sent it, and then stared at the ceiling for a while. On Saturday afternoon he went to the library, and she wasn't there yet, so he sat in their usual spot. He'd begun thinking of it as their spot, which was probably worth examining, and opened the second book he checked out, this one on the history of blood agreements between major magical families. He was in chapter 4 when she arrived, without hurry, 3 books under her arm. She sat down, set her books in their row, drew out parchment, looked at him. "You wrote back," she said. "I usually do. I wasn't sure that one warranted." She stopped. "I wasn't sure what to do with that one after I sent it." "Were you inaccurate?" he asked. "No," she said. "Then it warranted a response," he said. She looked at him for a long moment and then nodded once, in the way that meant she'd filed the information and updated her model accordingly. Then she opened her books. "Ragnarok wrote to you. You know Ragnarok? The Greengrass account is managed by his office." She smoothed her parchment. "My mother wrote. She and my father know the contract activated. How do they feel about that?" She was quiet for a moment. "My father thinks it's a significant opportunity for the family. He's not wrong." She said this with the careful neutrality of someone separating their personal position from their accurate summary. "My mother thinks it's a significant complication. She's also not wrong. And you?" "Both," she said. "At once." She looked at him. "Your parents' version of the contract, the Potters, was not adversarial. Edmund Potter, who signed it, was by all accounts someone who made alliances based on genuine compatibility, not political calculation." She paused. "The Greengrass who signed it was the same, apparently. Ilaria Greengrass was known to be someone who chose carefully. You think they knew their heirs would be us?" Harry said. I think they couldn't have known. But I think they built a contract that would only wake for heirs who made choices like they did. She looked at her book without quite reading it. I reached out to stop you falling without thinking about who you were. The contract woke up for that. She paused. Not for a calculated political move. For a reflex. Harry understood what she was saying. The willing contact clause. The contract recognizes the quality of the choice. She said. Not just the action. They sat with that for a moment. I want to go to Gringotts, Harry said. Ragnarok mentioned Hogsmeade weekends. Will you come? She looked up. To Gringotts. You need to see the full contract text as much as I do. Your family's copy is at home. He held her gaze. You're better at reading legal documents than I am. You don't know that. You read the potions syllabus for fun. You cataloged the restricted section on your third day. You sent me notes in annotated format. He raised an eyebrow. You're better at reading legal documents than I am. There was something that might have been the start of a smile, very brief. Fine, she said. I'll come. First Hogsmeade weekend is in November. I know the schedule, she said, which he'd expected. He went back to his book, and she went to hers, and the library did its quiet Saturday afternoon thing around them, pages turning, dust in the low light, Madame Pants moving between shelves like a hawk that had decided books were worth protecting, and it felt, Harry thought, like something that was supposed to happen. Not the ancient magic making it feel that way. Just the reality of two people who understood each other's silences being in the same room. He didn't find the name until page 212. He almost missed it. It was in a footnote, in a chapter about the Azkaban complications of certain blood agreements when one party was imprisoned. The footnote was about a specific case study of a contract between two ancient houses, and it used the Potter-Greengrass agreement as a comparison, and in the comparison it mentioned the name of a solicitor who had filed the dormancy exception records in 1982. Solicitor of Record 1S, Black, later imprisoned without trial, Azkaban Fortress, November 1981. Harry put down the book. Sirius Black. He'd heard that name. Twice, actually. Once from a brief, dark comment from Hagrid on his first day, and once from Ron's family, in passing, as the name of someone you mentioned only when you wanted to make a point about how thoroughly wrong a person could go. He'd catalogued it then as he catalogued everything that felt like it was waiting to be relevant. The solicitor who had filed the Potter family's contract dormancy exception, which would have been the legal protection that kept the contract viable even when there were no adult Potter heirs, was the man currently in Azkaban for allegedly betraying Harry's parents to Voldemort. He sat with the weight of that for a long moment. What did you find? Daphne's voice quiet. He looked up. She was watching him with the precise attention she brought to things she'd decided mattered. He turned the book and slid it across the table, his finger on the footnote. She read it. Her expression did nothing dramatic. But her jaw set. He filed the dormancy exception in 1982, she said. After your parents died. Which means he knew about the contract. Before Azkaban. Harry pulled the book back. My father's best friend was the person who legally protected the contract that connected me to you. And then he went to prison. Without trial, Daphne said. Harry looked at her. The footnote says it, she said. The book says it. He went to Azkaban without a trial. She met his eyes. That's either an oversight so large it's hard to believe, or it was deliberate. Someone didn't want him talking, Harry said. Someone didn't want him talking, she confirmed. About what, exactly, is a larger question. Harry closed the book carefully. The library around them continued its Saturday afternoon existence, perfectly normal, perfectly quiet. I want to see his file, Harry said. Whatever's public about the case. The Ministry will have records, Daphne said. Some of it will be public, if there are any public records at all. She paused. My father knows some people in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Not allies, exactly. Contacts. Could you ask? She considered. Carefully, she said. I don't want my father knowing why. Can you do that? Ask without explaining? I'm very good at asking things without explaining them, she said, with the faint tone of someone stating a professional credential. Harry smiled at that, and she saw it, and looked away at her parchment with the expression of someone who had decided something was irrelevant. There's one more thing, Harry said. Tell me. The contract sheet, the précis from Gringotts, says the solicitor of record has to be a party to the full documentation review. If that's Sirius Black and he's in Azkaban, then getting access to the full contract terms requires either replacing the solicitor of record or getting Black out, she said, catching it immediately. She looked at him steadily. You knew this before you told me. I found it 3 minutes ago, he said. But you connected it immediately. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Getting someone out of Azkaban is not a first-year project. Probably a third-year project minimum. He agreed. She looked at him to see if he was joking. He wasn't. She turned back to her parchment. Right, she said. Then we have time to plan. We. She said it entirely naturally, which was how Harry understood that she meant it entirely naturally, and the contract's quiet pulse in his wrists ran warm and steady, and outside the library windows the Scottish November began, cold and grey and full of the particular promise of things that were just getting started. Chapter 4. The Language of Death. The letter from the Greengrass estate arrived on a Tuesday. Harry knew because Daphne's posture changed at breakfast. He was across the hall and 40 feet away, and he knew because the contract had developed a new quality over the last week, not the emotional flares it produced in moments of danger, not the warm pulse of proximity, but a subtler thing, a kind of peripheral awareness, like knowing someone had entered a room before you saw them. He'd started thinking of it as the second edge of his attention. Everything else in his field of view, and then Daphne somewhere in it, always locatable. The owl was green-banded, private family courier, not the school post, and it landed beside her plate and left a sealed letter and was gone again before Pansy, beside her, had looked up from her eggs. Daphne broke the seal with one finger, read the letter without changing her expression, folded it, put it in her bag. Then she finished her toast. Whatever was in it, Harry found out at the library that Sunday. She arrived exactly on time, set her books in their row, and before she pulled out her parchment she put a folded piece of paper on his side of the table. Not parchment, paper. Cream-colored, with the Greengrass family crest embossed at the top. My parents want me home for Christmas, she said. They've formally requested it. Harry unfolded the paper. It was a summary, her handwriting, not the letter itself, of what her parents had said. Practical. Precise. She'd boiled it down to the relevant points, which was very her. Father, contract is an asset. Wants to understand full terms. Suggests Christmas as opportunity for family alignment discussion. Mother, concerned about exposure. Wants discretion maintained until we understand the legal implications. Both want me home. Are you going? He asked. Yes, she said. It's a reasonable request. She looked at him. They won't try to weaponize it. That's not how my family operates. But they see it as useful. Everything is useful to them. That's not a criticism. It's just accurate. She opened her first book. The question is whether I let them define what useful means. Harry understood that. The Dursleys had spent 10 years trying to define what he was for. He understood the particular work involved in having a different answer. What will you tell them? The truth, she said. That it activated, that we're researching the full terms, that I'm not making any decisions about how to proceed until I have complete information. My mother will respect that. My father will want more. What will he want more of? She was quiet for a moment. He'll want to know what you're like, she said. Which I'll tell him honestly. She turned a page she hadn't actually read. I'll tell him you're straightforward. That you don't perform. That you're significantly more powerful than you should be at this stage, and that you know it and don't make a show of it. She paused. He'll want to know if you're someone he can deal with. And what's the answer? She looked at him with the direct blue gaze he'd come to read as its own kind of language. The answer is yes, she said. But that the dealing will be on your terms as much as his, which he'll find interesting rather than off-putting. He respects people who know their own value. Harry thought about Lucius Malfoy, who he'd heard about through several channels by now, Ron's family, Draco's general demeanor, and a passing comment from Hagrid that suggested Lucius had fingers in everything. Then he thought about the kind of man who would raise Daphne, who would build a family on precision and genuine principle, who would write asset without meaning tool. Different, he thought. Lucius and the senior Greengrass were probably different in the way that mattered. Tell him I look forward to being dealt with, Harry said. Daphne's chin lifted a fraction. That's exactly the right thing to say, she said, with the tone of someone who hadn't quite expected it. Don't tell me you knew that. I guessed. You didn't guess. She turned back to her book. You read the situation. There's a difference. They worked through the afternoon, and when Blaise appeared at 4 o'clock, also very him, materializing at the chair beside Daphne's books with a cup of tea from somewhere and the relaxed manner of a cat that has decided your lap is appropriate, Harry didn't look up. She told you about Christmas, Blaise said. I did, Daphne said. I was getting to it. You got to the summary. I'm providing the emotional context, which you're too organized to do naturally. Blaise looked at Harry. She's nervous about going home. Not about her parents. About what it means to go back to an environment where this. He gestured between them in the general direction of the contract. Will be the thing everyone wants to discuss. Blaise, Daphne said. You're welcome, Blaise said, opening his own book. Daphne looked at Harry as if expecting an awkward response, and then looked surprised when he just nodded. That makes sense, Harry said. Going back and having it be the first thing, the main thing. He paused. Like going back to the Dursleys after the letters started coming. Suddenly everything's about the one thing you haven't processed yet. She looked at him. Yes, she said. Exactly that. Blaise raised his teacup at Harry slightly, which Harry understood as acknowledgement from someone who showed it rarely. December came fast and cold, the castle getting its proper winter character. Frost on the dungeon windows, ice on the lake, the grounds going silver in the morning. The Quidditch pitch was brutal in the new chill, and Harry started practice in 4 layers plus a warming charm courtesy of Hermione, who had figured out third-year charms in approximately 6 weeks and delivered this one to him without commentary in a folded note, which was how Harry understood they were definitely friends now. Gryffindor played Slytherin in the 2nd week of November. Harry had known this was coming. Oliver Wood had known it was coming and had responded by scheduling practices at a rate that could charitably be described as committed and less charitably as slightly unhinged. The team responded to Wood the way people responded to genuine conviction, with a mix of exasperation and faith, which ultimately produced very good Quidditch. What Harry hadn't anticipated was how the match would actually feel. He was in the air 20 minutes in, scanning for the snitch through the cold grey morning, when he became aware that Slytherin's seeker, a third-year named Terence Higgs, quick and aggressive and with the deeply personal grudge of someone who'd been top of his year until a first year showed up, was shadowing him. Not blocking. Watching. Trying to read his eye movements and follow his attention to the snitch rather than find it independently. Fine. Harry had been teaching himself to look at nothing while looking at something else since age 6. Courtesy of needing to read Uncle Vernon's moods without appearing to. He found the snitch in the lower right corner of the pitch 11 minutes later, a flash of gold against the grey-brown of the stands. He didn't move toward it. He flew a wide left arc, away from the snitch, and watched Higgs follow him, confused, and then Harry rolled back right and dived and the Gryffindor stands erupted before he'd even caught it, because they could see what he was doing even if Higgs couldn't. He caught it at 20 feet above the ground with his arm extended, his fingers closing around something so fast and small and warm that it felt less like catching and more like it had decided to come to him. The stands made the kind of noise that had physical weight. He pulled up and held the snitch out and grinned, which he didn't do often enough, apparently, because the Gryffindor team descended on him with the full enthusiasm of people who'd been told by Oliver Wood for 2 months that this was possible. In the Slytherin stands, as he taxied down toward the ground, he looked without meaning to. The Slytherin students were mostly doing the dignified version of disappointment, composed, quiet, the collective decision not to react visibly. But he caught Daphne's gaze for half a second from 60 feet away, and what he saw was neither congratulation nor its absence. She looked at him with something that was close to satisfaction, like someone watching a prediction prove accurate. He touched down and was swallowed by the team and didn't look again. The last day of term before the Christmas holidays was a Thursday, and the castle had the particular buzzing energy of several hundred children trying to appear focused, while actually being completely elsewhere. Harry packed his trunk that evening with the intention of staying at Hogwarts. He had nowhere else to go, the Dursleys having made it warmly clear that his continued absence was not a problem, and went down to dinner feeling the specific quality of a castle that was about to empty. Daphne found him in the entrance hall. Not an accident this time. She was clearly there with purpose, her traveling cloak already on, her bag over one shoulder. She looked the same as always, composed, direct, but there was something slightly set about her jaw. "I wanted to tell you something before I leave," she said. "All right," he said. "I spoke to my father's contact in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement." She glanced at the students moving around them and adjusted her voice to carry only to him. "Sirius Black's case file is sealed. Not restricted, sealed. There's a difference. Restricted means limited access. Sealed means someone, specifically, didn't want it opened." Harry held that for a moment. "Can it be unsealed? By the minister, or by a sitting Wisengamot member with sufficient seniority? Or," she paused, "or by a direct claimant with standing? Which means someone who can demonstrate personal relevance to the case. Someone like his godson," Harry said. She met his eyes. "I don't know if that's what you are," she said. "The Black case file might clarify that. But legally, if Sirius Black named you as godson and there's documentation of that, you would have standing." "Right," Harry said. "I'll be gone 3 weeks," she said. "My mother is going to want to meet you at some point. She'll be polite about it. Unlike your father. My father will be perfectly polite. He'll also be reading everything you say for information content." She adjusted her bag. "I told him you do the same thing to people you meet." "What did he say?" "He said that was either reassuring or concerning and he'd determine which one he met you." The corner of her mouth shifted. "Which I thought was honest." "All right," he said. "I know," she said. Not with expectation, with something quieter. She turned toward the carriages. "Then, the mortal clause in the contract. If something happens to either of us, I know about the mortal clause. Nothing is going to happen," she said, which wasn't sentiment. It was a statement of intention. "But I wanted you to know I know about it." "Daphne," he said. She paused. "Have a good Christmas," he said. She looked at him for a beat. "You too, Harry," she said, and walked out into the cold, and the great doors swung behind her. He stood in the entrance hall for a moment, and in his wrist the pulse went gradually quieter as the carriages rolled away down the drive, and he thought about standing in a room and feeling it get larger. The Greengrass estate in Wiltshire was everything Daphne had grown up knowing and nothing she'd been able to properly remember while she was away. It was large in the way of old family magic, not ostentatiously large, not Malfoy-large, but the kind of large that came from a house that had been added to thoughtfully over 4 centuries by people who knew the difference between space and ostentation. The library was the best room. The garden was dormant for winter, but you could still see the shape of what it was in the structure of the hedges and the placement of the stone. Everything about Greengrass Hall said people who knew who they were lived here, which was either comforting or oppressive depending on whether you agreed with who they were. Daphne had always agreed mostly. The mostly was the part she'd been examining. Astoria met her at the door, which was typical. 8 years old and possessed of the particular energy of a child who had been waiting all day and had opinions about it. Astoria grabbed her bag and attempted to carry it, which didn't work physically but was the right gesture. "You look different," Astoria said, with the direct observation of a child who hasn't learned yet to pretend she hasn't noticed. "I've been away for 3 months," Daphne said. "Walk with me. Mother says you have news," Astoria said, walking beside her with the slightly elevated pace of someone keeping up with someone taller. "She won't say what kind." "What kind do you think?" Astoria considered. "Magic news. The big kind." She looked up at Daphne with dark eyes that were already sharper than most people twice her age gave her credit for. "Is it about Harry Potter?" Daphne looked at her sister. "How do you know that name?" "I read the papers," Astoria said with dignity. "And Mother said you were coming home and looked at Father in the way she does when it's complicated, and the only complicated thing I could think of that would make her look like that is if you'd done something at Hogwarts involving someone important, and the most important first year at Hogwarts is, all right," Daphne said. "Yes." Astoria absorbed this. "Is he nice?" Daphne thought about that for a moment longer than she'd intended to. "He's honest," she said. "Which is better than nice, usually." Astoria considered this with the gravity of someone taking an opinion seriously. "What does he look like?" "Thin," Daphne said. "Dark hair. He has a scar." "I know about the scar." "I meant what does he look like?" Daphne looked at her sister. "He looks like someone who's been watching people carefully for a long time and has gotten very good at it," she said. "Which is not an answer to what you asked, but it's the true one." Astoria seemed satisfied with this, which was one of the things Daphne liked best about her sister. She had a very good sense of when an answer was real even if it wasn't the expected shape. Their mother met them in the sitting room, which was warm and smelled of the particular tea she ordered from a specific shop in Diagon Alley. Isolde Greengrass was precise in the way of someone who'd built precision as a skill rather than inherited it as a trait, which gave it a different quality, earned and deliberate, and entirely secure. She was fair-haired like Daphne, with the same direct blue gaze, and she stood and embraced her daughter without the self-consciousness that made some of her friends' parents look like they were performing affection. "You look well," her mother said. "I am well," Daphne said. "Your father wants to speak with you after dinner," I assumed. Her mother looked at her for a moment with the assessing intelligence of someone who knew her very well. "How are you with it?" she asked. "Not the politics. Not the implications. How was she?" Daphne sat down and accepted the tea her mother handed her. "I'm managing it," she said. "That's not what I asked?" A pause. "It's strange," Daphne said. "Having something in you that's external. That has its own character. I keep being aware of it." She looked at the fire. "And of him. Which is the strangest part. I know where he is, roughly. I know when something significant is happening to him. I felt it when we faced the troll together, and I felt it when he..." She stopped. "When he what?" "He stood up for someone," Daphne said carefully. "One of his housemates. Someone was being cruel. He stepped in." She paused. "I felt it when he made the decision. Like warmth. A specific kind." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "And how do you feel about him?" she asked. "Not the contract. About him." Daphne looked at her tea. She thought about the library on Sunday afternoons and the notes, and the way he'd said, "You didn't let me fall. That's not manipulation," with such complete certainty. She thought about the way he looked at her like she was exactly what she was, not what he needed her to be. "I respect him," she said, which was both less and more than the whole answer, and she knew her mother knew that. "Good," her mother said. "That's the foundation everything else is built on." She sipped her tea. "Your father is going to want to turn this into an alliance." "I know. He's not wrong that it could be. He's also not wrong that it's more than that," Daphne said, with slightly more steel in her voice than she'd planned. "The contract isn't a political instrument." "No," her mother agreed. It isn't. But the people trying to make it one won't care about that distinction. She looked at her daughter. Which people specifically concerns me. Lucius Malfoy was at your father's club last week. Daphne went still. He knows, her mother said. We don't know how much. But he was asking your father questions, politely, socially, about whether the new term had brought any interesting developments in the family. How did father respond? As if nothing had happened, her mother said. Which was the right response. But Lucius is perceptive, and your father's version of nothing has happened is sometimes visible to very careful observers. She set her cup down precisely. Lucius Malfoy is not an enemy you want to have. I know, Daphne said. He's also not an ally you want to have, her mother said. Which is the more important understanding? He will always want more than he gives, and he'll find a way to ensure that's the case before you realize it's happening. Her eyes were serious. This is a conversation you need to have with Harry Potter. I will. Soon, her mother said. Because if Lucius knows the contract is active, the next step will be working out what he can do with that information. Her father's study smelled of cedar and old books and the particular combination that meant he'd been working on something requiring both precision and strategy, which covered most of what Casimir Greengrass did. He was not a loud man. He was not a warm man in the way that people meant when they said warm, the easy, demonstrative version. He was warm in the way that stone retains heat, steadily, reliably, long after the fire was lit. He stood up when Daphne came in and came around the desk and looked at her with clear, appraising eyes that were very like hers. Sit down, he said. Tell me everything. She sat. She told him the relevant facts in the order of relevance, which she'd organized on the train. He listened without interrupting, which was one of his best qualities. He was a complete listener, the kind that made you feel each thing you said had landed before the next one came. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The Sirius Black connection is significant, he said. I know. Black filed the dormancy exception from Azkaban, he said. No, that's not right. He filed it the month before he was arrested. October 1981, the contract records would show. He laced his fingers together. Which means he knew about the contract before the Potters died, and his last action as their solicitor was to protect it. He knew it would matter, Daphne said. Even in 1981, with no heir visible, he protected it. Either out of loyalty to James Potter, her father said, or because he understood what the contract was worth. He paused. Or both. Loyalty and understanding aren't exclusive. Mother says Lucius knows. His expression shifted, very slightly. Your mother is perceptive, he said. He was at the club. He asked the right kind of questions, the kind that mean you already know the answer and want to see if the person you're asking knows you know. What did he want? To establish whether I'd be an obstacle or an asset, her father said flatly. Lucius has always wanted to position himself between power and the people who hold it. If the Potter-Greengrass contract becomes significant, and it will, because they're both already exceptional and the enhancement is only beginning, then controlling access to that power becomes its own power. He can't control the contract, Daphne said. No, her father agreed. But he can try to control the circumstances around it. The ministry relationships, the legal interpretations, the social narratives. He looked at her. What is Harry Potter like? She told him honestly, as she told her mother, and her father listened with the same complete attention and then nodded. You described him as someone who knows his own value, he said. Without performing it, she said. There's a difference. There is. He was quiet for a moment. I'm going to tell you what I think, and you're going to tell me if I'm wrong, because you know this situation better than I do. She waited. Lucius is going to move carefully, he said. He'll try to separate you, not physically, not dramatically, he's too sophisticated for that. He'll try to create circumstances in which you and Potter have conflicting interests, or in which the people around you push you in different directions. He'll start with the Draco relationship. Draco is already opposing Harry socially, she said, which Lucius might encourage and might discourage depending on what serves him. Her father paused. If I were in his position, I would approach this one of two ways. Either make Potter an offer, access, protection, guidance, framed as a gift but structured as a debt. Or discredit the contract itself. Find a legal interpretation that limits its terms, reduces its power, makes it something small and manageable instead of what it actually is. Which is? Her father looked at her with something that was not quite the political strategist for a moment, but the man underneath. Something that hasn't existed in 3 centuries. He said. A genuine, fully activated blood agreement between 2 heirs who both have the capacity to grow into it. Not just legal. Not just political. He paused. Real magic. The kind the old families built everything on. He held her gaze. Lucius will understand that. And it will frighten him, because he can't own it. Daphne sat with this for a moment. He'll try to own it anyway, she said. Yes, her father said. He will. Then Harry needs to know, she said. Before the next term starts. Her father nodded. He didn't look particularly worried about this, which told her he trusted her judgment. That had always been the way of their relationship. He tested, she passed, and then he let her move. It was, she'd always felt, close to respect. One more thing, he said. The serious black situation. I'm not letting it go, she said. I know you aren't. I'm not asking you to. He pulled open a desk drawer and extracted a small, folded document. This is a copy of the petition format for sealed case unsealing. Your mother obtained it from a contact at the Wiesengemot registry. He passed it across. The claimant's standing application is the relevant section. You'll need documentation of the godson relationship. That would be in the Potter vault. He paused. And you'll need a Wiesengemot member to co-sponsor the petition. Do we know any? We know several, her father said. Whether they'd involve themselves in something that might irritate the ministry is another question. He closed the drawer. But Augusta Longbottom owes your grandmother a debt she's been carrying for 15 years. I suspect she's been looking for an opportunity to settle it. Daphne thought about Neville Longbottom, round-faced and trying, who Harry stood up for in corridors. She thought about the shape of coincidence, and whether coincidence was actually a thing that existed or whether it was just pattern recognition arriving late. I'll write to Harry tonight, she said. Tell him, her father said, that I am not making demands of either of you. Tell him also that if he would like to visit after the new year, before term starts, that invitation is open. He paused. Isolde will bake, which she only does when she wants to make someone feel at home, so tell him not to read too much into it. Daphne stood. I'll tell him the baking is a form of strategic hospitality. That's essentially accurate, her father said, with the small dry warmth that was his version of a smile. The letter took her an hour to write, not because she didn't know what to say but because she kept starting with the political information and then stopping and starting again. She eventually wrote it in 3 sections: Lucius, the petition, and the invitation. She signed it simply DG and then sat with the signed letter for a moment before she added, at the bottom, in the slightly different ink she'd come to associate with the things she added after, Astoria asked what you look like. I told her you look like someone who's been watching people carefully for a long time and has gotten very good at it. She said that sounded like someone she'd like to meet. I thought you should know that, because my sister is a very good judge of people and she doesn't make that determination quickly. DG. She sent it with the family owl and went to bed, and lay in her childhood room that was the same as it had always been and felt, in the new way she'd been feeling things for 3 months, the faint and distant pulse of someone on the other end of something very old and very certain. Steady. Present. Not going anywhere. She pulled her blanket up and let it settle her and slept. Harry read the letter 3 times. He was in the Gryffindor common room, which was blissfully empty. Most of the students who'd stayed for the holidays were at the Christmas Eve feast, But Harry had come up early and was sitting in the chair by the fire with Hedwig on the armrest, and the only other person in the room was Neville, who was home, and the crackling fire, which was good company. He read the Lucius section and his jaw set. He read the petition section and felt something clarify in him, the way it did when a problem went from general to specific, when you could see the shape of what to do even if the path was long. He read the last part about Astoria and the corner of his mouth pulled before he could stop it. He wrote back. He was getting better at the timing of it, when to respond immediately, and when to let it sit. This one he wrote immediately, because several of the things in it deserved answers before Christmas Day. Lucius makes sense. Your father's read of him sounds right. The offer framed as that approach is the one to watch for. It's how people with power stay ahead of people they think they can own. He's in for a surprise. The petition is real. I'll look in my trunk for anything about the godson relationship. I haven't gone through all the family documents that came with the Gringotts package yet. There's a lot I haven't looked at properly. The invitation, yes. I want to come. Before term starts is good. I can be there the first week of January if that works. Tell Astoria I look forward to meeting someone who makes fast determinations slowly. That's a very specific skill. He folded it, and sent it, and watched Hedwig disappear through the window into the cold Christmas Eve sky, and then he sat back and looked at the fire and thought about Lucius Malfoy trying to position himself between power and the people who held it. He reached into the fire's warmth and thought about what kind of power you built by choosing your own values versus having them assigned to you. He thought about a first-year boy from a family of old money and old ideology who never had anyone refuse his father's worldview to his face. He thought about how Draco wasn't his enemy. He was a product. The same way Harry had been a product of the Dursleys' making until he decided to be something else. He went to his trunk and opened it, and pulled out the Gringotts package, which he'd been treating with the same organized neglect he gave most paperwork. He sorted through it properly for the first time: deeds, estate documentation, investment records, things that meant nothing to him yet, and near the bottom, in a sealed envelope marked in handwriting he didn't recognize as anyone's, he found a document. Certificate of Godparenthood, registered with the Wisengamot offices, November 1, 1979. I, James Charles Potter, do formally name Sirius Orion Black as godfather to any and all children born of my marriage to Lily Jean Potter, née Evans. This registration carries full legal standing under Wizarding Family Law, Section 4. Witnessed and sealed. Harry sat on the floor of his dormitory with the document in his hands, and outside the window Christmas snow had started, falling straight and quiet in the still night. He had a godfather. Who was in Azkaban. Who had protected his contract with Daphne before he went to prison. He held the certificate carefully, like it was something that could break, and felt something move in him, not the contract, not the magic, just the very human thing of understanding that someone had chosen to be connected to you and had kept the evidence, and the evidence had survived. He folded the certificate and put it in the front pocket of his trunk, where the important things lived. He was getting Sirius Black out of Azkaban. He didn't know how yet. It was a third-year problem minimum, which meant 2 years of building the groundwork, understanding the law, finding the right people, making the right arguments. He was 11 and it was Christmas Eve and the snow was falling and he had exactly the amount of patience required, which was all of it. He climbed into bed and lay back and thought about a man he'd never met who had protected something precious at the end of his freedom, and the pulse in his wrist beat steadily, and the snow came down, and the castle held its breath around him like something that had been waiting a very long time for the people living inside it to start becoming themselves. Chapter 5. What fire knows January arrived in Wiltshire with the particular cold of the English countryside, not the dramatic Scottish cold of Hogwarts, where the wind had opinions and the lake went iron grey and the castle itself seemed to lean into the weather. This was quieter. The kind of cold that settled into fields and bare hedgerows and made the whole world look like a charcoal drawing. Harry arrived by Fleur at 9 in the morning on the 3rd of January, which was his first time using Fleur powder, and he arrived with the precise elegance of someone who had absolutely no idea what they were doing, which was to say he stumbled out of the fireplace at Greengrass Hall and caught himself on the hearthstone, and stood up with ash on his jeans and his hair worse than usual. And the first person he saw was a small dark-haired girl sitting in the armchair across the room with a book, watching him arrive with the transparent delight of someone who had been waiting for this specifically. "You're not what I expected," Astoria Greengrass said. "What did you expect?" Harry said, brushing ash off his sleeve. "Someone who looked like a famous person," she said. "You look like a regular person who had a difficult morning." "To be fair, foot travel is difficult," Harry said. "I've done it since I was 4, she said with the mild pride of someone who considers this relevant information. "I did it for the first time 12 minutes ago," Harry said. Astoria considered this. Then she said, "I'm Astoria," and held out her hand with the formal bearing of someone who had been taught manners and had decided to use them selectively. Harry shook it. "Harry." "I know," she said. "You look less like your pictures." "What do the pictures look like?" "Smaller," she said. "And more overwhelmed." She turned a page in her book without putting it down. "Daphne is in the garden. Father is in his study, which means he'll come out in approximately 20 minutes when the house elf tells him you arrived. Mother is in the kitchen, which she'll tell you is for a different reason, but it isn't. I was warned about the baking," Harry said. Astoria looked up sharply. "She warned you about the baking?" "In a letter. She said it was a form of strategic hospitality." Astoria stared at him. Then she laughed, which was a bright, sudden sound. "That's the most Daphne thing I've ever heard," she said. "She told me you were good at reading people. She wasn't wrong." "She told you that?" "She tells me most things," Astoria said, with the comfortable certainty of someone who has always been told most things and knows what that means. "Not all of them. But most." She tilted her head. "The garden is through that door and to the left. Mind the third step. It's uneven." Harry stopped. Astoria looked at him with enormous eyes. "What?" "Nothing," he said, and went to the garden. The garden in January was architecture more than garden, all structure and bare bones, the hedges cut with the precision that said someone cared about this deeply enough to maintain it through seasons when most people stopped looking. Stone paths ran between beds that would be something else in spring, and at the far end a low wall looked out over the Wiltshire fields going white and still under the sky. Daphne was sitting on the wall with her back to the house. She had a book open on her knee that she wasn't reading. He could tell because she was very still in the particular way that meant she was thinking, not the way that meant she was reading, which was a faint but consistent page-tracking motion he'd catalogued over months of library Sundays. He walked down the third stone path without stepping on the uneven one, and came up beside her and sat on the wall. She didn't turn. "How was the flu?" "Terrible," he said. "It gets better." "Does it?" "No," she said. "You just get better at covering it." She closed her book. "Astoria said something to you." "Several things." "The one that made you stop?" He looked at her profile. "She told me to mind the third step. That it was uneven." Daphne was still for a moment. Then, "I didn't tell her to say that." "I know," he said. The fields stretched out below the wall, winter flat and quiet. A crow picked at something in the far distance. The cold was the sort that you stopped noticing after a while, which was the most English thing about it. "She's observant," Harry said. "Embarrassingly so," Daphne said, with something that was almost warmth. "She'll know everything about you by dinner." "She already knows several things," Harry said. "I think she was waiting for me specifically." "She's been asking about you since September," Daphne said. "She pretends it's academic interest." "It isn't." He glanced sideways at her. "You talk about me to her." "I talk to her about most things," she said, which was the same thing Astoria had said, and hearing it from both sides made it feel like a complete picture. She looked out at the fields. "I wanted to say something before all the other conversations happen." "All right." "Whatever my father says today, and whatever Lucius eventually does, and whatever the contract becomes legally or politically, none of that changes what this is. For me. She said it with the brisk precision she used when saying something that cost her. What it is a choice I made on a staircase. Before I knew who you were. That's the only part that's mine, and I'm not giving it up to be reframed by anyone. Harry looked at her. The pale winter light was doing something honest to her face. No school context, no Slytherin table, no contract discussions. Just a person on a garden wall saying exactly what they meant. I know, he said. The contract, Tracy said, willing contact? The willingness is the whole thing. Yes. And I made a choice too, he said. When I didn't take Malfoy's hand on the train. When I went back for Hermione on Halloween. The hat said my strongest thread was reaching out when I should pull back. He paused. I think the contract woke up because we were already the same kind of stupid. She turned to look at him then, which was not something she did quickly or carelessly. I'm not stupid, she said. The heroic kind of stupid, he said. That's marginally better. You went toward a 12-foot troll to find me, he said. When every sensible instinct said go to your house. The contract pulled, the contract told you I was in danger. You still had to choose the direction. He held her gaze. You went toward. She looked at him for a moment in the still January garden. The crow had found whatever it was looking for in the far field. Somewhere in the house, someone was opening a window. You're very precise when you want to be, she said. I learned from somewhere, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. She looked back at the fields. Come inside, she said. Father will have finished waiting by now. Casimir Greengrass was exactly what his letters suggested, contained, intelligent, and in possession of the specific social ease of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the wrong word cost something. He stood up when Harry came in, which Harry understood as a deliberate signal, and shook his hand with the firm grip of someone communicating that they considered this a meeting between equals. Harry, he said. Welcome. Sir, Harry said. Thank you for the invitation. Sit down. He gestured at the chairs arranged around a low table, which had tea on it, and there was something from the kitchen that smelled like cinnamon. Daphne says you're direct, so I'll be direct. I have questions. I'd prefer you answer them honestly, and if you don't know something, say so. I'd rather a real answer than a managed one. Agreed, Harry said. Casimir poured tea with the efficiency of someone who'd had this ritual often enough that it didn't require thought. The contract terms. Have you read the full text? The précis. We've scheduled a Gringotts visit for the first Hogsmeade weekend of term. I have our family's copy here if you'd like to read it before then. Harry glanced at Daphne, who nodded slightly. Yes, he said. I would. Casimir pulled a document from the bookshelf behind him, leather-bound, the leather the deep brown of something very old, with the Potter and Greengrass crests embossed on the cover. He set it on the table between them without opening it. I want to discuss Lucius Malfoy first. My father was at his club, Daphne said. He asked questions? Casimir confirmed, looking at Harry. He already knows the contract is active. I'm not certain how. Possibly Draco mentioned something from school. Possibly he has other sources. Lucius has always invested heavily in information gathering. He sat back. His next move will be either an approach or an isolation. He'll try to offer you something or try to separate you from people who reinforce your position. What would he offer? Harry asked. Guidance, Casimir said. Access. He'll frame it as filling the gap left by your parents. He knows you have no family in the wizarding world to advise you. He'll present himself as filling that role. And the debt that creates, Harry said. Casimir's eyes moved to him with something sharper. Yes. Exactly. The debt it creates, which he'll be very careful never to name as a debt, but which he'll call in when the moment is right. He paused. You understood that without me explaining it. I've met people like him, Harry said. Different context. Same structure. The Muggles who raised you. It wasn't quite a question. Harry looked at him steadily. They were different from Malfoy. Smaller. But the principle, making you feel like you owe them something for tolerating your existence, yes. I recognize the structure. Casimir was quiet for a moment. You're going to refuse him? When he comes, yes. He won't take that easily. I know, Harry said. But I'd rather have a clear enemy than a complicated debt. Casimir looked at him for a long moment, and what Harry saw in his face was something he hadn't expected, not the political satisfaction he might have predicted, but something more personal. Something like relief. Good, Casimir said, and poured more tea. That's the right answer. Not just strategically. Actually right. He passed the cup to Harry. Now, tell me about the Sirius Black situation. They spent the next hour going through it properly, the certificate of godparenthood, the sealed case file, the petition format, Augusta Longbottom's potential as a co-sponsor. Casimir listened and occasionally redirected and once corrected Harry on a point of Wiesengemot procedure that Harry hadn't known, and Harry absorbed the correction without defensiveness, which seemed to register. Longbottom is the right choice, Casimir said. She has standing, she has the will, and she has nothing left to lose politically since Frank and Alice. He stopped. Recalibrated. She's not someone Lucius can easily pressure. He's tried before on other matters. She's resistant. Neville's my friend, Harry said. I'd be asking his grandmother to take a risk. Yes, Casimir said. Which means the ask has to be real. She'll see through anything managed. He paused. Can you make a real ask? I can make an honest one, Harry said. Whether it's real to her depends on her. Casimir nodded. Write to her before term starts, he said. Be direct. Tell her what you need and why. Don't frame it as anything other than what it is. Daphne, beside Harry, said nothing. But her posture had shifted slightly over the course of the hour, something in it more settled. He noticed without noting it aloud. One more thing, Casimir said. He looked between them. The enhancement rate. Daphne's told me about the acceleration after significant events. I want you to understand something that the précis probably summarizes badly. He picked up the leather-bound document. The original contract language talks about the enhancement in terms of the parties growing into each other's capacity. It's not about making you stronger independently. It's about making you stronger in complementary ways. The areas where one of you is naturally strongest are amplified in the other. Harry thought about the shield that had redirected. About Daphne's transfiguration at 5th year equivalent. What am I strongest at? Instinct magic, Casimir said. Fast, physical, decisive. You act before thought, and the magic follows the action. Daphne's strength is the opposite. She thinks before she acts, and her magic follows the intention. They're complementary. Together. He stopped. Together we're both. Daphne said. Together you're both. Casimir confirmed. He set the document back down. Which is either an extraordinary gift or a significant target, depending on who's doing the looking. The room settled into quiet. Outside the window the winter garden was empty and still, and somewhere down the hall the smell of something baking had gotten more specific and more compelling. I think, Harry said, your wife is ready for us. Casimir looked at him. You can smell it? Can't you? Casimir looked at Daphne, who had the expression of someone managing the urge to smile. He's been here an hour, she said, and he's already better at reading this house than most people who visited for years. I lived in a house where reading the room was the difference between a good day and a bad one, Harry said. You get very good at it. Casimir was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up. Come on then, he said. Isolde will be offended if it goes cold. Lunch was the kind of meal that said something about the people making it, not elaborate, not performing, just genuinely good food in a warm kitchen with the family around it. Isolde Greengrass had her daughter's blue eyes and her husband's composure and a directness that was entirely her own. She looked at Harry when he sat down with the frank, intelligent assessment of someone who had decided in advance to form her own opinion and wasn't going to be rushed about it. "You have good manners," she said, which in the context of this family was not small talk. "Thank you," Harry said. "Not polished manners," she said. "Real ones. There's a difference." She passed him bread. "You say thank you to the house elf." "Should I not?" "You should," she said. "Most people don't." Astoria was eating with the efficiency of someone who wanted to get back to observing. She'd positioned herself across from Harry, which gave her the best angle on his face, and she'd been cataloguing with the methodical thoroughness she apparently brought to everything. "You have the fluss soot out of your hair now," she said helpfully. "I did it before lunch," Harry said. "In the bathroom." "Daphne told you where the bathroom was?" "She did. She doesn't usually show people around the house," Astoria said, with the tone of someone noting a data point. "Astoria," Daphne said. "I'm just observing," Astoria said. "You're editorializing." "I can do both." Harry ate his soup and listened to this with the specific pleasure of someone watching people who loved each other well. Astoria editorialized with complete sincerity, and Daphne managed it with the particular patience she only had for her sister, not the composed distance she maintained elsewhere, but something warmer and more human and more real. He understood, watching them, something about Daphne that the library Sundays and the notes hadn't fully shown him. She had a self she kept carefully managed in most contexts, not from dishonesty but from the instinct of someone who'd learned that precision protected you. But in this kitchen with his sister, the management came down a few degrees, and what was underneath was someone who laughed at "I can do both" and let it show. He wanted to see that more. That was a new want, specific and clear. He ate his soup and didn't stare. After lunch, Casimir produced the leather-bound contract, and the four of them, Harry, Daphne, Casimir, Isolde, sat at the kitchen table and read through it properly. The full text was considerably longer than the précis and considerably more interesting. 300 years of magical legal language, dense and archaic and occasionally incomprehensible, but with passages that came through clean as water. One passage Harry read 3 times. "The contract does not create. It recognizes. Between these bloodlines there exists a natural affinity of magical character, a complementarity recognized by the magic of the signatories and sealed for the protection of their lines. The contract does not force this affinity into being. It declares it, and in the declaration makes it visible. It doesn't create," Harry said aloud. Daphne looked up from the section she was reading. "The contract," he said. "The précis makes it sound like the contract is the cause. But this says it's the recognition. The affinity was already there." She read the passage. He watched her face process it. "Between the bloodlines," she said slowly. "Not between us specifically. Between the Potters and the Greengrasses." She looked up. "Which means the contract didn't create what we—" She stopped. "No," Harry said. "It just made it visible." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Isolde Greengrass, who had been reading her own section, looked between them without any apparent urgency. "The distinction matters," she said. "To both of you, I think. Whether you're obligated to something or whether you've always been naturally inclined toward it, and the magic simply confirmed it." "Yes," Harry said. "Yes," Daphne said. They both went back to reading. He stayed through dinner and left by Fleur at 8, turning down Casimir's offer to stay the night because he had 3 weeks of holiday reading that he hadn't done yet, and also because staying the night in the Greengrass house felt like it was slightly ahead of where the timeline should be, and he'd learned from a very young age that taking things at their actual pace rather than the rushed version made them last. Daphne walked him to the fireplace. "Your father is exactly what I expected," Harry said. "In a good way. He liked you," she said. "He won't say it in so many words. But he poured you tea without asking if you wanted it, which is the tell. Your mother is quietly terrifying," Harry said. "Yes," Daphne agreed, without any apparent concern about this. "Astoria," Harry said, "is going to be something extraordinary when she grows up." Daphne looked at him. "She is," she said with a directness that was entirely personal, no performance in it. "She already is." He took the flip powder from the mantelpiece. "I'm going to write to Augusta Longbottom this week," he said. "I'll send you a copy." "Let me read it before you send it," she said. "You think I'll be too direct?" "I think you'll be exactly direct enough," she said. "I want to see if I agree." He stepped toward the fireplace. "Daphne." "What?" "The thing in the contract," he said. "The affinity that was already there. Before the activation." She held his gaze. "I know," she said. "Right," he said. "Just checking we're on the same page." "We usually are," she said. He threw the powder and said Potter House, Hogwarts, and the green fire took him, and the last thing he saw before the world went spinning was her standing in the firelight with her arms at her sides and her chin up and her eyes on him, absolutely steady. Term started on the 6th. By the 15th of January, something was wrong with Quirrell. Harry had been watching him in a low-level, consistent way since Halloween, but this was different. Where before there had been something behind the surface, the wrong quality of attention, the flicker of something not Quirrell in his eyes, now the surface itself was cracking. He was thinner. He moved like someone with pain they were managing. He cancelled 2 classes in a single week, which Flitwick explained as a brief illness and which Harry suspected was nothing like brief or an illness. He sent Daphne a note on a Thursday. "Quirrell is getting worse. Whatever is wrong with him, it's accelerating. I want to go to the 3rd-floor corridor." She sent back, "The 3rd-floor corridor that's been explicitly restricted?" "Yes." A pause of several hours. Then, "Not without me." They went on a Saturday evening, which was Harry's idea because Saturday evenings had the most student traffic in other parts of the castle, which meant the 3rd floor would be emptier than usual. He tested this theory 3 times since term started, and it had held. Daphne met him at the bottom of the 3rd-floor staircase at 7. She was wearing her school robes and had her wand in her hand and looked exactly like someone who had decided to come along and wasn't going to treat the decision as anything more dramatic than it was. "You told Blaze?" he asked. "He knows I'm somewhere he's not worried about," she said, which was a very specific answer. "Ron knows I'm somewhere," she said. "Yes. Let's go." The 3rd-floor corridor smelled different from the rest of the castle. Older somehow, not the comfortable old of the library or the dormitories, but something more fundamental. Like stone that hadn't been regularly used in a long time and had settled back into what stone was before human occupation. The door at the end had clearly been magically locked and had clearly been unlocked again, because the frame showed the residue of recent spellwork, and the door itself was slightly ajar. Harry and Daphne looked at each other. He pushed it open. The dog was enormous. Not immediately visible, the room was dark except for the moonlight coming through a high window, and the dog was in the far corner, and for 2 full seconds Harry's brain offered 3 dogs, very close together before it correctly recategorized. 1 dog, 3 heads, and every hair on his body stood up simultaneously. Fluffy, he'd heard Hagrid's name for it from Ron via the twins, via the persistent current of Hogwarts gossip, was asleep. All 3 heads. The snoring was the kind of sound a building might make if buildings breathed. On the floor beneath its massive central paw, almost completely obscured, was a trapdoor. Daphne grabbed his arm before he could move toward it. He looked at her. She shook her head once. He looked at the trapdoor. He looked at the sleeping dog. He looked at Daphne and saw in her face the same thing that was happening in his own head. We are not ready for whatever is down there, and we know it, and there will be another time. He stepped back. She stepped back with him. They pulled the door to its previous position and went back down the 3rd-floor corridor at the same measured pace they'd come in on. "That's what he's guarding," Harry said, when they were 2 floors down and the normal castle sounds had resumed around them. "Something that needs a Cerberus," Daphne said. "Which means something significant. And Quirrell wants it," Harry said. Whatever is wrong with him is connected to what's down there. He's being driven toward it. By what? Harry had a thought he'd been having since October, since Quirrell's Eyes in Defense class, since the Halloween night when the troll appeared and Quirrell's collapse had seemed entirely too theatrical. He hadn't said it aloud yet because it was a large thought, and he'd been waiting to be sure enough. Voldemort, he said. The name landed in the corridor with its own weight. Daphne didn't flinch at it, which he'd expected. She was exactly the kind of person who used names accurately regardless of what the name carried. You think Voldemort survived? She said. Something survived, Harry said. Something that needs a body to use. Something that's using Quirrell. He stopped walking. The night I defeated him, I was 1 year old. The spell that hit me rebounded. People assumed he was destroyed. But destroyed and gone are different things. A remnant, she said. Something diminished that survived. And it's been waiting to come back. He turned to look at her. And it chose Quirrell. And it's after whatever is under Fluffy. The Philosopher's Stone, she said. He stared at her. Nicholas Flamel, she said with the brisk tone of someone delivering information. He's the only known maker. He's also extremely old and presumably using it to stay that way. Dumbledore is his friend. The stone would give someone who'd lost their body the ability to. She stopped. To come back. Properly. How long have you known this? Harry said. I've suspected it for 6 weeks. She said. I didn't have confirmation about Quirrell until now. She looked at him. I didn't want to tell you a theory. He absorbed this. So it's Voldemort, in Quirrell, trying to get the stone that's under a Cerberus on the 3rd floor of Hogwarts. Yes, she said. And Dumbledore knows, Harry said. He has to know. The stone is here because he brought it here. He put it in the safest place he knew, she said. Which suggests he doesn't think his safest place is impenetrable. Which suggests he might be expecting someone to try. Or, Harry said quietly, he's expecting me to try. Daphne looked at him. The protections down there aren't just for keeping people out, he said. They're also, I think they're tests. The kind of thing where the person going through has to demonstrate something. He thought about Dumbledore's eyes at the sorting feast, when Harry had caught him watching with something beyond ordinary attention. He knew the contract activated. He has to know. He probably knows what the enhancement is doing to my magic. He's watching. Whether you'd go, she said. Whether I'd go when the right time came, Harry said. He's not trying to stop what's coming. He's shaping the conditions it happens in. That's a significant amount of trust to put in an 11-year-old, Daphne said. He lost the last one, Harry said. I think he's trying to not lose this one. She was quiet for a moment. We're not ready yet, she said. You said it in the room. We're not ready yet, he confirmed. But we need to be ready before Quirrell breaks through. He's getting worse fast. He started walking again. How long, do you think? Weeks, she said. Not months. She fell into step beside him. We need to know what the protections are. All of them. So we know what we're walking into. Hermione, Harry said. What about her? She's been researching Flamel since before Christmas. She hasn't found the right angle yet, but she's close. And she's better at magical research than both of us combined. He glanced sideways. I want to tell her. Daphne processed this. About Quirrell. About all of it. About what we think is down there. He paused. Not about the contract. That's not necessary right now. But about the stone and the threat. She won't panic, Daphne said, which was not a question. She'd been watching Hermione across the Great Hall since September with the eye of someone assessing capabilities. She'll research, Harry said. Precisely and quickly. It's what she does. All right, Daphne said. Tell her. But Harry, I know, he said. Careful with who else. Voldemort alive is a ministry conversation they're not ready to have, she said. If we take it to them now, before we have proof, they'll deny it and start watching us instead of the problem. Right, he said. Which leaves Dumbledore. Who already knows, she said, and is managing it his own way, which may or may not align with ours. They parted at the staircase that split toward their respective houses, the way they always did. The castle around them was alive with Saturday evening noise, distant laughter, a suit of armor arguing with a portrait, the ever-present Peeves' cackle from somewhere above, and against that backdrop they stood for a moment in the ordinary human way of two people who have just confirmed something large. "I'll tell Hermione tomorrow," Harry said. "Write me what she says," Daphne said. "You know I will." He paused. "Stay out of the third-floor corridor without me." She looked at him. "Likewise," she said, which was not a concession but a deal, stated as a deal by someone who understood the symmetry of it. He told Hermione on Sunday morning in the library, and she did not panic. She sat across from him with her hands flat on the table and her expression doing the specific thing it did when she was processing something that was both terrible and interesting, and she said, "The protections. There'll be multiple layers. Dumbledore wouldn't rely on one. Hagrid's creature is the outer layer, which means the teachers were involved, each one probably contributed something in their own discipline. Can you find out what? I can work backward from what I know about each professor's specialty," she said, already reaching for parchment. McGonagall would have transfiguration-based. Flitwick charms. Sprout possibly something botanical. Snape. She stopped. Snape will have something sophisticated. He's the best potions master in Britain. What about defense? She looked up. Quirrell designed a protection for the thing that Quirrell is trying to get through. Which means, Harry said, that either Dumbledore didn't know at the time, or he did know and he wanted the outer layer to be something Quirrell could get past. To let whatever's in him feel like it's winning. He paused. I think it's the second. Hermione stared at him. That's a very dark reading of Dumbledore's strategy. Is it wrong? She thought about it with the honest rigor she applied to everything. No, she said. It might not be wrong. She looked at her parchment. I'm going to research every protection I can identify. I'll have something by end of week. She paused. Harry. Yes. You're going to go down there, she said. Not a question. Not a concern. A statement of observed fact. Yes, he said. Then I want to come, she said with the same calm. He looked at her. It's dangerous. I know, she said. I also know that if it's Quirrell and it's Voldemort and it's the stone, then we'll need everything we have. 3 people solve more problems than 1. She met his gaze. I'm not asking. I'm telling you I'll be there. All right, he said. She nodded, opened her first book, and began. February became March, and the castle felt like a held breath. Quirrell stopped teaching in the second week of February, replaced by a ministry-approved substitute who taught them basic shield theory for 3 weeks and looked profoundly bored by all of it. Quirrell was still in the castle. Harry could feel his wrongness from down the hall, the particular quality of something that shouldn't be, like a note played slightly off-pitch. And the third-floor corridor, when he walked past it on his twice-weekly route, felt warmer. Like something was leaning against the door from below. The notes with Daphne continued, and the library Sundays, and in between, the natural development of 2 people who'd been finding their way towards something since September. It wasn't romantic. Harry was 11 and Daphne was 11, and neither of them was in a hurry for it to be anything other than exactly what it was, which was the most honest relationship Harry had ever been in with another person. He knew her now. He knew the weight of her silences and the quality of her humor, which was dry and precise and arrived unexpectedly, and the way her magic felt when she was working, focused, intentional, like thread pulled tight before it's used. He knew she kept Astoria's letters in her bag, not her trunk. He knew she had a theory about Snape's allegiances that was more nuanced than anyone else in the schools. She knew him back. That was the remarkable part. She'd taken the same patient, systematic attention she brought to everything and applied it to him, and what she'd found was not the famous person or the symbol but just Harry, and she kept what she found in the careful way she kept important things, with specific attention and no performance. The contract between them pulsed steadily, day after day, winter going towards spring. On the 19th of April, the pulse changed. Harry was in the charms classroom when it happened, a flare, sudden and hot, behind his sternum. Not his emotion. Not his location. He spun in his chair before he understood why, and Flitwick said, "Potter?" And he was already moving, was already saying, "Sorry, Professor, I need," and was already through the door. The awareness said, "Third floor?" Now. He went at a run. The corridor was empty when he arrived, but the door was open, properly open, hinged back, the lock blown, and from below the trapdoor came a sound that wasn't Fluffy's snoring. A crash. Something large moving below. Quirrell had gone through. Harry stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds. Then he went back to the staircase and sent his Patronus, still forming, still smoky, but bright enough to carry direction, toward the Slytherin dungeons, which was reckless and obvious and entirely necessary. Then he went through the door. Fluffy was unconscious. A small harp sat in the corner, still playing a melody on its own, and the dog's 3 heads were slack and soft with charmed sleep. Harry crossed to the trapdoor, pulled it open, and dropped. He landed in something soft, devil's snare, which he recognized from herbology, and which immediately started closing around him. He didn't struggle. He looked up at the faint light above and thought fire, and his hands did what they'd done with the troll, the same raw instinct, and the heat that came off him made the plant recoil fast enough that he was on the ground in 4 seconds. Through a door into a second room, hundreds of winged keys in the air, an old broomstick, a lock on the far door. Harry looked at the lock, looked at the keys, looked at the broom. He was on the broom in 10 seconds and through the door in 3 minutes, which was good time for a room full of keys that moved like they didn't want to be caught. The next room was the chess set. He stopped. The pieces were 15 feet tall and they were already arranged in an endgame, which meant whoever had come through before him, Quirrell, moving fast, possibly still ahead, had played through it. The board was set from the previous game and needed resetting. He had been learning chess from Ron for 6 months, in the natural way of having nothing else to do on wet Sunday evenings, and he'd gotten better, but he was not Ron. He looked at the board and saw the path through in about 45 seconds, which was fast, which told him the contract's enhancement was doing something useful with his pattern recognition. He played it through. A bishop took his position, and he had to move twice to avoid it, and the white queen was aggressive in a way that suggested the pieces had their own investment in the outcome. But he was through in 10 minutes and breathing fast and uninjured except for a graze on his left hand from a rook's elbow. The door at the far end of the chess room opened before he reached it. Daphne came through. He stared. She looked at him, at his hand, at the board behind him. "You played through it," she said. "You came through behind me," he said. "Your Patronus found Blaze," she said, moving toward him with her wand already up, inspecting the graze on his hand with brisk efficiency. "He told me. I went through the trapdoor before anyone could stop me, which took approximately 40 seconds. The snare, I cast incendio immediately," she said. "I read ahead." She produced a handkerchief from somewhere and wrapped his hand with the practiced ease of someone who grew up in a household that dealt with injuries sensibly. "How far ahead is he?" "2 rooms, maybe 3, he said. "If the protection slowed him down." "The Snape room is next," she said. 7 potions. Logic puzzle. I have the answer. He stared at her again. "How? Hermione gave me her notes this morning," she said. "She found the answer 2 days ago. She's going for McGonagall." "She's not here?" "She sent me," Daphne said, meeting his eyes. "She said, and I'm quoting, the contract is worth more than a backup plan, and Harry needs Daphne more than he needs me down there." She held his gaze for a moment. "She's right." Harry thought about Hermione, alone in the school above, going for McGonagall, and felt something large and grateful happen in his chest that he filed for later. "Right," he said. "Let's go." The troll room, already defeated, reeking of something, not their problem. The flames room with Snape's potions, the 7 bottles in a row, the purple fire behind and the black fire ahead. Daphne read the riddle faster than Harry could have done it, indicated the small bottle on the right end without hesitation, and handed it to him. "There's only enough for one," she said. He looked at her. "The bottle is 1 measure," she said. "1 person. You go forward." She pointed at the smaller bottle beside it. "I go back, get Hermione and McGonagall, and bring them down here. If something goes wrong, you'll feel it," she said. "Both of us will. The mortal claws." She said it practically, not dramatically. A feature of their situation, not a sentiment about it. "And I'll feel it if you're in danger, and I'll get help. It's faster than you think." He looked at her. In the light of the purple fire, her face was sharp and certain and entirely present. Not afraid. Not performing anything. Just here, in the way she always was, making a decision with complete clarity. "Come back as fast as you can," he said. "I will," she said. "Harry." She waited until he was looking at her directly. "Don't die." "That's the plan," he said. "It should be more than a plan," she said. "It should be a certainty." "Done," he said, and drank the potion. The cold moved through him like water over stone, and he stepped through the black fire, and it took him. The last chamber was mirrored and quiet. Quirrell stood at the far end with his back to Harry, facing the mirror of Ariste, which Harry recognized immediately, that pull, the particular magic of something that showed you what you wanted most. He'd heard about it from older students. He'd been careful to avoid finding out where it was, because he'd understood somehow that the mirror was not something he was ready for. Quirrell turned. In the chamber they had the conversation that didn't need to be dramatized. Quirrell removed his turban and Harry saw what was on the back of his head and felt no horror. He'd known this was coming, had built himself to know it, and what he felt instead was the cold clarity of someone who has been moving toward a moment, and is now in it. He moved first. Not with a spell. Harry was not a refined spellcaster, not yet, not at 11, not under these circumstances, but his instinct was absolute, and his body moved before his mind had finished the thought. He went directly at Quirrell, hands first, the same instinct as the troll, and when he grabbed Quirrell's wrist the contact produced the same channel discharge, the same gold-white light, and Quirrell screamed. Voldemort's voice filled the chamber from the back of the broken man's head, and Harry felt it, the ancient cold of something that had survived death by refusing it, something diminished and furious and still vast. He felt it the way the contract had taught him to feel things, the emotional truth of it, beyond the surface. Voldemort was afraid. Not of Harry specifically. Of the fact that Harry was not afraid of him. He grabbed Quirrell's face. The light was everywhere. From a great distance, though she was above him, through fire and potions and chess pieces and snare and stone, Daphne Greengrass felt her sternum go white-hot. She stopped running. She pressed her hand against her chest. She felt him. Not pain. Something larger than pain and entirely unlike it. Power being expended completely, down to the last, in a room she couldn't reach. She stood in the corridor above and felt it, and knew he was alive the way you know a fact, the way you know what year it is, as a bedrock certainty beneath everything else. She ran faster. In the chamber below, the man who had been Quirrell came apart, and the thing in him left in a rush of cold air, and Harry Potter stood in the ruin of it, and his hands were still glowing faintly, and the mirror behind him showed his own face looking back at him, and in his pocket he could feel the weight of the stone that had simply appeared there the moment he'd looked into his own reflection and wanted nothing. He sat down on the floor. His hands stopped glowing. The chamber was quiet. He put his hand over his wrist and felt the pulse of the contract, steady and certain, and felt Daphne's end of it, fast, moving, alive, coming, and he let himself breathe. He was still breathing when Dumbledore came through the flames. Chapter 6. The names we choose. The hospital wing at Hogwarts smelled like dittany and clean linen, and the particular magical antiseptic that Madame Pomfrey applied to everything with the thorough confidence of someone who had decided that sterile environments were non-negotiable. Harry had been there for 3 days before he was properly aware of it. Not unconscious exactly. More like, elsewhere. The magic he'd discharged in the chamber had taken something with it when it went, and what remained needed time to refill, which his body seemed to understand better than his mind did. He surfaced periodically, registered things, Dumbledore's voice, Madame Pomfrey's hands, the warm, familiar pulse in his wrist, and then went back under. He surfaced properly on the morning of the 4th day. The sun was coming through the hospital wing's high windows at an angle that meant mid-morning. The wing was quiet. In the chair beside his bed, Hermione was asleep with a book open in her lap, her head tipped sideways at an angle that was going to give her a sore neck. In the chair on his other side, Ron was very much awake, eating what appeared to be an entire bag of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans with the stoic dedication of someone who has been keeping vigil and has decided to do it with snacks. Ron looked up, saw Harry's eyes open, and said, without preamble, "You look terrible." "Thanks," Harry said. His voice came out rough and thin. "That's good, actually. When you came in you looked worse." Ron offered him a bean. "Fair warning, this one might be earwax." "I can't tell anymore." Harry ate it. It was earwax. He didn't particularly mind. "How long?" he asked. 3 days. 4 if you count the first night in the chamber before they got you out. Ron set the bag down. "Dumbledore came and went twice. Pomfrey's been very protective of the ward. McGonagall came in yesterday and just stood at the foot of the bed for a while. Didn't say anything. Just looked at you." He paused. "I think she was checking you were real." "What's the story?" "For the school?" "Quirrell had a breakdown," Ron said. "That's the official version. He was found in the lower levels and he's gone, Harry. The Muggles would say he died of whatever was wrong with him. The magical version is..." He stopped. "Pomfrey wouldn't let me read the report. He didn't die of what was wrong with him," Harry said. "He died of what was using him." Ron absorbed this with the careful quiet of someone who had been turning something over in his mind for 4 days. "Voldemort," he said. "Yes." Ron nodded once, slowly. "Gone now, though." "For now," Harry said. "Right." Ron picked up the beans again. "I told Hermione. She cried, which I wasn't expecting, and then she went very organized, which I was." He glanced at the sleeping Hermione with something that was clearly careful affection held at arm's length by someone who hadn't quite decided what to do with it yet. "She's been compiling notes. Everything she found out about the stone, the protections, what you went through. She said she wants to write it down before anything goes officially documented by the ministry." "Why?" "Because the official documents," Ron said with the instincts of someone raised in a family that had dealt with ministry documentation for generations, "will say what the ministry wants them to say." Harry looked at the ceiling. The familiar pulse in his wrist was quiet and steady. He pressed 2 fingers against it out of habit. "There's someone who wants to see you," Ron said in a slightly different tone. "Careful. She's been waiting outside the ward for 2 days. 2 days, Harry said. "Pomfrey said immediate family only until you woke up. Ron chose his words with slightly more deliberateness than usual. "She's been very patient about it. She doesn't show up and make a scene. She just sits in the corridor. Reading. Comes back each morning." He paused. "I went out once to check she was still there, and she didn't look up from her book. She just said he's still asleep like she already knew." "She does know," Harry said. "Or can tell." Ron looked at him for a moment. "Right," he said. "The contract thing. Which you haven't explained yet. It's a long story." "I've been here for 4 days," Ron said. "I have time." Harry told him. Not everything, not the most personal pieces, those weren't his alone to share, but the structure of it, the contact on the sorting night, The dormancy and activation, the enhancement, the awareness. The serious black connection. Ron listened with the complete attention he brought to things he found genuinely interesting, which was one of the better things about him, the distinction he made between things worth listening to and things not. When Harry finished, Ron sat back and thought about it for a moment. So the contract, he said slowly, basically recognized that you two were already the same kind of person. That's one way to put it. And now it's making you both stronger. In complementary directions. Yes. And she sat in the corridor for 2 days, Ron said in the tone of someone completing a logical chain. He ate a bean. She's allowed in, he said. Obviously. Harry looked at him. You're all right with it. She stayed in the corridor for 2 days, Ron said as if this were a complete argument. And she's the one who went through the trapdoor behind you when she could have gone for help immediately. He paused. I asked McGonagall. She said Greengrass came to her first, told her everything, gave her Hermione's notes about the protections so McGonagall knew exactly what she was walking into, and then said I'm going now, and went before McGonagall could stop her. He looked at Harry. Which, yes. I'm all right with it. Harry got his arm working well enough to reach the bell on the nightstand and rang it. Madame Pomfrey came, took his vitals with brisk efficiency, declared him improving and allowed one additional visitor. She said this with her usual tone, which was somewhere between medical authority and personal exasperation, and then went to open the ward door. Daphne came in with the same composure she brought everywhere, which didn't fool Harry for a second. He'd felt her end of the contract for 4 days, not distress exactly, but a sustained, specific tension that was nothing like her ordinary steadiness. She was wearing ordinary school clothes, not robes, which was the first time he'd seen her without them since the Wiltshire visit. She looked like she hadn't slept enough, which on her looked like the barest shadow under her eyes, barely visible. She sat in Ron's chair. Ron, with the quiet instinct of someone who understood when to be elsewhere, took his bag of beans and went to bother Hermione on the other side. Daphne looked at Harry. He looked back. You're awake, she said. Apparently, he said. You look terrible, she said. Ron said the same thing. Harry said. Apparently it's an improvement. She looked at his hands, which were resting on the blanket. The same hands that had pulled the magic through in the chamber, that had come apart under the discharge and left light on the stone floor. She looked at them with the careful attention of someone taking precise inventory. The stone? She said. Dumbledore has it, Harry said. He and Flamel agreed to destroy it. He told me that much. Good, she said. That removes the immediate problem. Whatever's left of Voldemort can't use it. He'll find another way, Harry said. Eventually, she said. Not soon. Whatever he had left went with Quirrell. She met his eyes. You destroyed the vessel. Everything possessing it dispersed. How do you know? Dumbledore told me, she said. When I came to him with McGonagall. He was very. She paused. He was very specific about what you'd done. I think he wanted me to know it worked. He wanted you to tell me, Harry said. He knew I'd be out for a while. Yes, she said. That's what I thought too. She looked at her hands in her lap for a moment, the very rare thing, Daphne looking at something that wasn't what she was looking at. When you went through the black fire, I felt, I know, he said. The mortal claws, she said. You were in genuine danger. I felt it. I know, he said again, quieter. I could have gone back, she said. After I told Dumbledore and McGonagall. I could have let them handle it and waited. But you didn't. I went to the trapdoor, she said. McGonagall stopped me at Fluffy's room. She had her wand out and her voice was. A pause. She was frightened, I think. I'd never seen her frightened before. She looked up. She said, Miss Greengrass, you cannot go any further. And I said I know, and I didn't. Because McGonagall was right, Harry said. Because you came back, she said very simply. The moment it was over, I felt it. The mortal claws released. The danger passed. She held his gaze. You came back before I had to decide whether McGonagall's wand was more important than the claws. Harry looked at her. What's the answer? He said. To that hypothetical. She looked at him for a long, precise moment. You're not dead, she said. So it's academic. Daphne. The answer, she said, is that McGonagall's wand was not more important. She said it without drama. Fact stated as fact. Which we won't discuss further because it isn't necessary. All right, he said. All right, she said. They sat in the comfortable silence that was theirs, and outside the windows the May sky was the deep, unambiguous blue of the castle at its most beautiful, and in the pulse between them the thing that had always been there ran warm and steady, and Harry felt himself start, genuinely, to come back. The owls started arriving on the 5th day. Harry's recovery proceeded fast enough that Pomfrey let him sit up by day 4 and walk by day 5, which she attributed to his constitution and he attributed to the contract's enhancement applying itself to healing the way it applied itself to everything else. He didn't say this to Pomfrey, who would either disbelieve it or immediately want to study it, either of which was useful right now. The owls brought 3 categories of things. The first category was well-meaning students and minor public figures sending cards and notes that ranged from genuinely kind to deeply uncomfortable. He responded to none of them, which he felt bad about for approximately 30 seconds before deciding that getting out of the hospital wing was a better use of his energy. The second category was one owl from Gringotts, from Ragnarok specifically, which said in the precise language of Goblin legal correspondence that the Potter estate account had registered an event of significant magical discharge and that Ragnarok would appreciate a consultation at the earliest convenience to discuss implications for the estate documentation. This Harry kept and wrote back to, politely, suggesting the first Hogsmeade weekend of next term. The third category was one letter, in plain brown paper, with no sender's address, that arrived on the 6th morning while Harry was eating breakfast in the ward with Ron and Hermione. The handwriting on the outside was the careful print of someone who didn't want their usual handwriting recognized. He opened it. 2 sentences. I know what you did. Your father would have done exactly the same. S.B. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it very carefully and put it in his pocket. What was that one? Hermione asked. A note, Harry said. From who? Someone who knew my father, he said, which was accurate and complete. Hermione looked at him with the expression she deployed when she knew there was more and was deciding whether to press. She decided not to, which was one of her better qualities. Ron was watching Harry's face with the slightly older version of recognition. He'd heard the story now. He knew what SB stood for. He said nothing. Harry finished his toast. Dumbledore came on the 7th day, in the late afternoon, when Ron and Hermione had gone to the library and the ward was quiet. He settled into the chair beside Harry's bed with the unhurried ease of someone who had all the time in the world and had made peace with that, and for a moment he simply sat, looking out the window at the May grounds with the expression of someone enjoying a view they knew wouldn't last. How are you feeling, Harry? He asked. Better, Harry said. Every day. Good. A pause. Good. He turned from the window. His eyes, behind the half-moon spectacles, were exactly as Harry had been expecting, that quality of multi-layered attention, the thing that had been watching since the sorting feast. I imagine you have questions. A few, Harry said. But first I want to say something. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose very slightly. You put the stone in the castle, Harry said. You set the protections. You made sure there was a path through that a determined, talented person could navigate. He kept his voice level. And you let Quirrell, let Voldemort, get close enough to the end of that path to force a confrontation. Dumbledore looked at him. You didn't put me in the chamber, Harry said. That was my choice. But you set the conditions so that when the moment came, I'd be prepared enough to survive it. He paused. I want to know if I'm right about that. The silence lasted long enough that Harry understood it was real consideration, not deflection. Partially, Dumbledore said. The stone was here because Nicholas needed it moved quickly and safely. The protections were designed to stop ordinary entry, not a determined human host carrying something as formidable as what remained of Tom Riddle. He paused. I expected a confrontation. I did not expect it to come this year. I expected more time. He looked at Harry with something that Harry thought might, if he was generous, be called guilt. I was wrong about the timing. And my error nearly cost you significantly. But you weren't wrong about me, Harry said. No, Dumbledore said. I wasn't wrong about you. He folded his hands in his lap. The contract complicates my models, he said, with a candor that surprised Harry slightly. I knew about it. I have known since the sorting night, when I felt it activate. It's the kind of event that leaves a signature in the magic of the castle itself. A pause. I wasn't certain it would activate. I'd hoped it might. Your being here, and Daphne being here, in the same year, the probability was high, but not certain. You arranged it, Harry said. I arranged nothing, Dumbledore said, firmly enough that Harry believed him. I cannot arrange blood agreements. I cannot make first-year students reach out to stop each other from falling. He looked at Harry steadily. What I can do is recognize when old magic has made a decision, and be glad of it. Why? Harry asked. Why does it matter to you? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Because what happened to you as a child left a mark, he said, that I understand better than I've communicated. The protection your mother's sacrifice created, it has limits. It protected you once, magnificently, and the remnants of it are in you. But Voldemort will return, Harry. What dispersed in the chamber below this school is not gone. It will reconstitute. It will find a way back. He paused. When it does, you will need to be more than you are now. Not more powerful necessarily. More complete. The contract does that, Harry said. The contract recognizes what you already are, Dumbledore said, which was the same language as the original document, and Harry understood it wasn't a coincidence. It makes visible the things that were already true. And in doing so, it gives them room to grow. He looked at Harry. You're 11 years old and you channeled a raw discharge powerful enough to destroy a viable host for a fragmented Dark Lord. In 3 years, in 5, I don't want to imagine what you'll be capable of, Harry. In the best possible way. In the best possible way, Harry said. Is that a warning? It's an observation, Dumbledore said. With the hope that you'll remember, when the power grows, that it came from choosing to reach toward people rather than away from them. Harry thought about this. Daphne's already reminding me when I'm wrong about things, he said. Dumbledore smiled, which was the real kind, not the performed warmth he sometimes deployed, but something quieter and more genuine. Good, he said. That is extremely good. A pause settled comfortably between them. I want to talk to you about Sirius Black, Harry said. Dumbledore stilled. He wrote to me, Harry said. I have the certificate of godparenthood from the Potter Vault. I have the evidence that his case file was sealed, specifically sealed, not restricted. I have the petition format for the unsealing. He held Dumbledore's gaze. And I want to know if you'll support the petition. The silence was longer this time. Harry, Dumbledore said carefully. I'm not asking you to testify or to take a position publicly, Harry said. I'm asking whether you'll tell me honestly what you know about Sirius Black and whether the evidence supports a trial. He paused. A real trial. Not an Azkaban admission without process. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone being asked to open a door they'd kept closed for a long time. Sirius Black, he said, was never given a trial. You are correct about that. The circumstances of 1981 were chaotic, and certain decisions were made with the speed that chaos demands and the carelessness that speed produces. He paused. I have my own doubts about the case against him. I've had them for some time. Then help, Harry said simply. It's not simple, Dumbledore said. It doesn't have to be simple to be right, Harry said. Another silence. Then Dumbledore removed his spectacles and looked at them as if they'd done something interesting. Augusta Longbottom, he said. She's willing, Harry said. Or she will be. I haven't asked yet, but I have reason to believe she will be. Augusta is one of the very few people in Wizarding Britain that Cornelius Fudge is genuinely afraid of, Dumbledore said. Which makes her the correct instrument for a petition of this kind. He put his spectacles back on. If Augusta co-sponsors the petition and I provide a supporting affidavit, not testimony, an affidavit, which is a somewhat more manageable commitment, the Wisengamot would be compelled to at minimum review the sealed file. And what they'd find, Harry said. What they'd find, Dumbledore said, is that the evidence against Sirius Black was thinner than anyone was prepared to look at in November of 1981. He paused. And that certain people had strong reasons to ensure it wasn't looked at carefully. Lucius Malfoy, Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. Where did you hear that name in connection with Black's case? Logical inference, Harry said. Sirius Black filed the dormancy exception for the Potter-Greengrass contract the month before he was arrested. If someone wanted him in Azkaban, and wanted the reasons sealed, they'd need either the Ministry's cooperation or enough leverage to make it happen quietly. Lucius was a significant Death Eater who claimed coercion. He came out of the First War with his social position intact. That requires the kind of cooperation you build with favors. He paused. Having Sirius Black quietly imprisoned removes one of the people most likely to know where the bodies were buried and willing to say so. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that was halfway between professional concern and something that might have been pride. You worked that out yourself, he said. Daphne and I worked it out together, Harry said. Her father confirmed the shape of it. Casimir Greengrass, Dumbledore said, in a tone that said he was revising several things simultaneously. He's not an enemy, Harry said. He's careful about who he commits to. But he commits fully when he does. He held Dumbledore's gaze. He wants the contract to mean what it should mean. He wants his daughter to have something real, not something political. Those two things aren't in conflict with what you want. No, Dumbledore said slowly. They aren't. He was quiet for a moment. I'll write the affidavit, he said. When the petition is ready, I'll sign it. He paused. I should have done this a long time ago. Yes, Harry said. You should have. He said it without accusation but without softening, and Dumbledore accepted it with the gravity of someone who agreed and knew that agreement didn't fix what it had cost. We'll do it now, Harry said. That's what matters. He was discharged on the 8th day, which Pomfrey communicated by appearing at the end of his bed, declaring him adequately recovered, and beginning to change his sheets before he'd fully gotten up, which was the hospital wing's version of a strong hint. He got dressed, packed his bag, and went to find Daphne. She was in the library. He'd known she would be, Sunday afternoon, their table, the familiar arrangement of her books. She looked up when he came in, assessed him in 2 seconds, and said, You look significantly better. I feel it, he said, and sat down. Dumbledore's writing an affidavit. She set her quill down. For the petition. Yes. That's. She paused. That's faster than I expected. I was direct, Harry said. Your father was right. Direct is the correct approach with Dumbledore. He responds to people who don't manage him. What did you tell him? The truth. He opened his bag and extracted a letter. This is for you to read before I send it. To Augusta Longbottom. He slid it across. Tell me if I'm being too direct. She read it. He watched her face track through it, precise and focused. When she finished, she looked up. This is not too direct, she said. This is exactly direct. Any changes? The 3rd paragraph, she said. Where you explain what you want from her. You said I need your help. Change it to I am asking for your help. Different implication. Need creates obligation in the reader's mind. Asking places the choice clearly with her. Harry took the letter back and made the change. Better. Yes. She returned to her parchment. When are you sending it? Today. Hermione's already written to Ragnar confirming the Hogsmeade date. He paused. Blaise knows, by the way. About the petition. She looked up. He was in the library on Thursday, Harry said. He put it together from things Hermione mentioned and found me in the corridor and said, very directly, the Sirius Black petition is going to make Lucius Malfoy move. He wanted to make sure I knew that. He's right, she said. Lucius has been quiet since Halloween. Too quiet. He's gathering information and waiting for the right moment. She looked at her book. The petition will be the moment. He'll understand immediately that a freed, vindicated Sirius Black is a problem for him on several levels. Black knew things. If he has a platform to say them from, Lucius will try to stop the petition, Harry said. Or try to turn it, she said. Stopping it is harder, with Dumbledore's affidavit and Augusta Longbottom as co-sponsor. Turning it, she paused. He might try to position himself as sympathetic to the effort. As someone who also wants justice. Use it to get close to you. The offer framed as a gift, Harry said. Yes. She met his eyes. When he makes the approach, and he will, probably through Draco first, since that's the social channel he has, don't dismiss it coldly. Dismissing it coldly confirms you're an enemy. Decline it warmly. Let him think you're naive. Harry looked at her. That's not how I would have handled it. I know, she said. It's how I would. The difference between your instinct and mine is the complementarity the contract built. You're better at the direct confrontation. I'm better at the long game. She paused. Trust me on Lucius. I do, he said, which was simple and absolute. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. He sent Hedwig with the letter that afternoon, with a note to the Longbottom estate asking for a meeting at Augusta's convenience. He sent a second letter to Ragnar confirming the Hogsmeade date. He sent a third letter, brief, 4 lines, to the Greengrass estate, addressed to Casimir, telling him about Dumbledore's affidavit and thanking him for the conversation in January. Then he went to find Neville. Neville was in the greenhouse, which was where he always went when the castle felt too full. Harry found him between 2 rows of something with small blue flowers that were apparently more complicated than they looked, and Neville looked up with the slightly startled expression of someone who hadn't expected company. Are you supposed to be out of the hospital wing? Neville asked. Pomfrey discharged me, Harry said. How are you? Me? Neville said in the tone of someone who'd expected to be asked about Harry. You, Harry said. Neville looked at his plants for a moment. I've been thinking, he said, about what you told Ron and he told me. About you and Daphne Greengrass. He looked up carefully. The contract. What about it? My grandmother, Neville said. She mentioned the Greengrass family, once. When I was small. She said they were a family worth knowing when things got hard. He turned over a small blue leaf between his fingers. I didn't understand what she meant then. I think I'm starting to. She's going to get a letter from me, Harry said. Neville stilled. About Sirius Black, Harry said. I need a Wisengamot co-sponsor for a petition to unseal his case file and pursue a proper trial. Dumbledore is writing an affidavit. Your grandmother was the name that kept coming up as someone who has standing and the will. He held Neville's gaze. I know it's a significant ask. I know there's risk to her if Malfoy decides to push back. I wouldn't ask if I thought there was another way. Neville was very still for a long moment. The greenhouse smelled of earth and something green and alive, and outside the windows the grounds were the brilliant green of May at its peak. She'll say yes, Neville said. She doesn't say no to things she thinks are right just because they're dangerous. He paused. She'll want to meet you. Properly. I'd like that, Harry said. She'll ask you hard questions, Neville said. She does that. I'll answer them honestly. She'll know if you don't. Then I'll be honest, Harry said. It's not a difficult commitment. Neville looked at him. No, he said. I don't suppose it is for you. He went back to his plants. She'll say yes, he said again. She's been waiting for something to do about things for a long time. Gran doesn't like waiting. Harry thought about Augusta Longbottom, whom he'd never met, but who he'd built a picture of through Neville's offhand comments and Casimir's deliberate ones, and thought, good. Neither do I. Draco found him in the corridor on the last Friday of term. Not a coincidence. Draco didn't do coincidences. He was waiting near the library, alone, which was the most significant detail. No Crabbe, no Goyle. Just Draco, with his hands in his pockets and his expression arranged in the deliberate approximation of casual. Harry stopped. Potter, Draco said. Malfoy, Harry said. You look better, Draco said. I've heard that a lot this week, Harry said. Was that the point of this? Draco's jaw tightened slightly. He was working at something, visibly, working against the instinct that had governed his entire social existence, which was the instinct of someone who'd always had the higher position and known it. He was doing something that cost him. My father, Draco said, is going to want to talk to you. Probably over the summer. He'll frame it as... He stopped. Started again. He'll make it sound generous. Harry waited. I'm not. Draco looked at him. This isn't me being your friend. I want to be clear about that. Clear, Harry said. But I'm also not my father, Draco said. And the things he does. A pause. The ways he does things. I don't always. He stopped again, with the frustration of someone who's found the edge of what they can say and can't quite cross it yet. You're warning me about him, Harry said. Without warning me. Because you're not ready to be on the other side of it. Draco's expression did something complicated. Don't make it into a whole thing, he said in a voice that was closer to 11 than anything Harry had heard from him. I'm not, Harry said. I heard you. He paused. I already know what he's going to do. But I appreciate you saying it anyway. Draco looked at him for a moment, genuinely looked, without the performance. How do you already know? Because I know the pattern, Harry said. And because someone who's better at long games than either of us has been watching him since September. Draco's eyes moved, almost involuntarily, in the direction of the Slytherin common room. Greengrass, he said. You should talk to her, Harry said. She's not your enemy either. She's been managing me all year, Draco said, with the flat certainty of someone who has just admitted something. She's been keeping you from making expensive mistakes, Harry said. That's not the same thing. Draco considered this. His jaw worked. You're different from what I expected, he said, which Harry had now heard enough times from enough Slytherins that he was starting to feel it as a collective statement about his expectations. So are you, Harry said, which surprised Draco visibly. Harry didn't elaborate. He just nodded once and walked on, and Draco let him go. The last night of term was the closing feast, which was also the night the House Cup was decided, which Gryffindor won by a slim margin after Dumbledore awarded last-minute points for what he called exceptional courage in extraordinary circumstances. The hall was divided between applause and Slytherin stoicism, and Harry ate his feast and felt, for the first time since the chamber, something that was straightforwardly and simply happy. After, when the four houses were dispersing toward their dormitories for the last time, he found a quiet spot in the entrance hall while the crowd moved around him and waited. She came through the Slytherin stream and peeled away from it without drawing attention, which she was very good at. Good feast? He said. Adequate, she said, which from her was generous. Your house is annoyingly loud when they win. Your house is annoyingly quiet when they lose, he said. It's unsettling. It's dignified, she said. It's unsettling, he repeated, and she let the corner of her mouth move. They stood in the entrance hall with the castle flowing around them, first years and seventh years and everyone between, and the torchlit stone walls doing the thing they did in the evening, warm and amber and very old. "The summer," he said. "The summer," she agreed. He'd written to Mrs. Figg, the squib who lived near the Dursleys and who, it turned out, had been keeping a minimal eye on him at Dumbledore's request, a fact he felt some complicated things about, and arranged to have access to her owl for the summer. He told Dumbledore, in direct terms, that Dumbledore had accepted without protest, that the Dursleys were not an appropriate summer residence, and that he expected the situation to be addressed before second year. Dumbledore had agreed with the weariness of someone who'd been telling himself a story about the Dursleys for a decade and had just been shown the story's flaws clearly. The summer would be the Dursleys, but differently. He'd make sure of that. "Letters," he said. "Of course," she said. "The Hogsmeade visit in September," he said. "Gringotts, and then Ragnarok. And the petition, once we have everything," she said. "My father is organizing his contacts. There are 2 people in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement who'll look the other way if Augusta Longbottom is leading the push. Look the other way or actively help. The difference matters," she said. "Actively help. They're not brave enough for the first category, but they're decent enough for the second." He nodded. Around them the entrance hall was thinning, the houses dispersing to their last evenings in the dormitories. Through the great doors, the carriage lights were already lit for tomorrow's journey to the station. "He'll be out by Christmas," Harry said. "Sirius Black. I'm making that the target." She looked at him. "That's aggressive timing." "Good," he said. "You don't know what you might run into legally," she said. "There are delay mechanisms in Wisengamot procedure that Lucius could trigger. Christmas," Harry said. "That's the target. We adjust the path if we have to, but we keep the destination." She held his gaze for a moment. He saw her run through the logical objections. He could almost track them. He knew her thinking well enough now. And then he saw her make the decision to trust the timeline because she trusted him. "Christmas," she said. "All right. Thank you," he said. "For all of it. This year." She looked at him with the direct blue gaze that was its own language by now, one he'd been learning since September 1st on a staircase in a castle. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "We're on the same side. You stayed in a corridor for 2 days," he said. "I had a book," she said. "Daphne," he said. "Harry," she said in the same tone. He smiled. She looked away at the stone walls and then back, and what crossed her face was something he didn't have a word for yet but thought he would eventually. The specific expression of someone who has found something they didn't know they were looking for and has decided, carefully and completely, to keep it. "Next year," she said, "when Lucius makes his move. I want us to be ready." "We will be," he said. "I want us to be better than ready," she said. "I want us to be so far ahead of him that when he makes his move he's already 3 steps behind where he thinks he is." "Tell me how," he said. "Summer reading list," she said. "I'll send it with the first letter." She looked at him. "Political history of Wisengamot, current composition and voting records, blood contract law, specifically the last 40 years of case precedent, and magical theory 4th through 6th year. We're behind on the theory." "That's a significant summer reading list," he said. "You asked?" she said. "I did," he agreed. "Send it." She nodded. She picked up her bag. Outside, the summer night was waiting, June dark, the stars beginning, the lake silver at its edges. Tomorrow the train would take them back to their respective worlds and the summer would happen, long and full of the groundwork of what came next. "The contract," she said, pausing at the bottom of the Slytherin staircase. "The thing it says? That the affinity was already there." "Yes," he said. "I've been thinking about it," she said. "The document said the contract recognizes rather than creates." She looked at him. "I think that means the choice is still ours. The magic didn't make us this. It just made it visible," he said. "Yes." She held his gaze. I want you to know that I choose it. The visible version. Not because of the contract, not because of the magic, or the politics, or what my father thinks, or what Lucius Malfoy is afraid of. She paused. Because of who you are. Which I know now. Harry looked at her in the torchlit entrance hall of a castle that had been holding old magic in its walls for 1,000 years, and felt the pulse in his wrists run warm and certain as a second heartbeat, and thought, yes. Exactly this. I know who you are too, he said. She nodded once. That was enough. With her, it always was. She turned and went down toward the dungeons, and he stood in the entrance hall and listened to the castle breathe, and the stars were coming out over the lake, and somewhere under all of it the old magic ran steady and deep as groundwater, patient as stone, entirely sure of what it had recognized. He went up to Gryffindor Tower and packed his trunk. In the morning, the train would take them back. In September they'd return. And in the time between, the letters, the reading, the groundwork laid in conversations and choices, and the slow, deliberate accumulation of knowing what you were doing and why, they would become what they were becoming. Not because a contract said so. Because they'd both decided to.